Number 10. Crying Wolf. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was a conflict between Vietnam and US forces in 1964. What's messed up about that is that 2 days later, it happened again. Actually, it didn't. Big prank. The second incident was fabricated by the US just to justify ramping up their presence in Vietnam. Sadly, it worked, as the next 8 years in Vietnam would end up being a total snipe storm for the US, as they would encounter problems abroad and at home. Thank goodness this is the only time the American government would ever lie about anything ever again, right? This was officially declassified decades later. Number 9. Agent Orange. The world agreed not to use chemical warfare after the First World War, as it was extremely cruel and lethal. So, you might be surprised that America used chemical weapons during the Vietnam War. Agent Orange, brought to you by the Dow Chemical Company, was a herbicide and defoliant dropped and sprayed from air vehicles to cut down the thick jungle brush. Viet Cong soldiers were excellent at living off the land and concealing themselves in the jungle. Bad guy hides in jungle, you remove the jungle. Makes sense. The chemical was extremely effective, but what's so messed up was the negative health side effects. Soldiers that were exposed to the chemical developed cancers years after the war. But what's even more crazy is how it affected the Vietnamese people. It created children with really bad health defects, and to this day there are many people who live with ill side effects of Agent Orange. That's just not right, man. That's wrong. That is so wrong, dude. Number 8. French Indochina. The US was not the first superpower trying to tame Vietnam. Vietnam used to be called French Indochina, and it used to be a colony of France. And when they no longer wanted to be a part of that, France came down to give them a piece of their minds. But you can probably guess how that went, considering the US was there 20 years later trying to do the same thing. While France was trying to keep a colony and the US was trying to stop communism from spreading to other countries, Vietnam was trying to fight for its independence, which is ironic for America because that's how they became a country. And yes, I know that the communist movement in Vietnam wasn't great by any standards, but the regime America was trying to put in place was no better. As much as France would have liked to keep Vietnam, times were changing, and there was no victory in sight, with or without American support. Number 7. Well, that escalated quickly. Up until 1967, the war was bad. But it was nothing compared to what was going to happen in 1968. In 1968, the Viet Cong launched the Tet Offensive, a massive military campaign designed to destroy the foreign invaders. All across the country, key targets were being attacked, and it seemed overnight that the war went from a 6 all the way to an 11. What's so messed up though is, even though the VC did not achieve major victories, it was costing a lot of American lives. With the Viet Cong using the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the war not only escalated in Vietnam, but had reached neighboring nations like Cambodia. This had an effect on the war back home. The US thought and told people it would be a quick war. They had the advantage. But after the VC flexing their military might, it was clear that more US soldiers would be needed to win the war, which some people were beginning to question in the first place. And as time went on, most people would protest America's involvement. Number 6. A terrible loss of life. The Vietnam War is one of the most important events in US history, and honestly world history too. It was a very hot war during the Cold War, which we could do a whole video on that itself. A time of superpowers ready to annihilate one another at the push of a red button. Thousands of young men volunteered or were drafted to fight in a war that would humble the very powerful country. 58,141 Americans would lose their lives in order to contain communism. Of that 61%, they were under the age of 21. That is an insane, I can't even believe that. The Vietnamese lost over 300,000 people in the conflict. The war is remembered for being a tragic loss of life, and the domino theory that communism would spread throughout the world if containment was not initiated didn't happen, as most countries today just aren't communist. Number 5. Civil rights. If you know the 1960s, then you know it was a decade of change. A lot of history to unfold in just 10 years. Again, we could probably do a whole video on that. The Vietnam War is especially important towards the civil rights movement, as black Americans were a big part of the war effort in Vietnam. Black soldiers were nothing new to the American military, but their integration with white soldiers was. Every war previous, soldiers of different skin color were separated into different units. While most soldiers got along, there was still a long way to go, as black soldiers were still often mistreated. It seemed, however, that in a war zone, white Americans and black Americans were fine, but at home had tensions. We could do a whole video on civil rights and segregation, but to sum it up, racial relations made Americans ask questions. And for black Americans, the question is, how is someone expected to fight a war in a foreign country that we really have no business being in for a country that won't allow a certain group of citizens to even buy a cup of coffee because they're not allowed to enter the building due to the color of their skin? Just doesn't make sense, man. Number 4. Mattel 16. The 1960s saw a lot of technological development. The extensive use of the helicopter comes to mind. During the early years of the Vietnam War, Americans were issued a brand new rifle. The M16 was a brand new design that flopped as hard as it could, as it tended not to work, which, if you're in a war, is kind of not what you want to happen. Your stuff's kind of gotta work. A rumor had spread around that the firearm never needed to be cleaned, which in a jungle setting with mud and rain just doesn't make any sense. This, with already existing flaws, made it jam and was rendered useless by soldiers. Nicknamed the Mattel 16 after the toy company, some soldiers were forced to use enemy weapons, which sadly in some cases may have led to fatal incidents of friendly fire. Number 3. I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Another very useful tool in destroying the Vietnamese jungle. Trees are made of wood, and wood burns, so set them ablaze. Except napalm is different. A chemical compound meant to burn at a very hot temperature of 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it would burn for a while. This was used in multiple ways, but probably the most effective with airstrikes. While not the first time firebombing had been used, as it was proven effective in the firebombing of Japan during World War II, the Vietnam War saw almost the same amount of ordnance dropped, napalm and others included, as used in all of World War II by America. That is an insane statistic. It had a terrible effect on people, as it can burn skin off. The most infamous picture from the Vietnam War had something to do with this. We can't show it to you, but you've probably honestly seen it already. The military would later disband its use, as the ability to control napalm's destructive power is limited. Number 2. GI Kebab. While the Viet Cong may not have won many battles against the US, they were still formidable fighters. They had the lay of the land and laid traps everywhere. From 1965 to 1970, 11% of American casualties were related to Viet Cong placed traps. What's so messed up in that is that in a modern war with modern technology, a lot of the traps the Viet Cong were using were something out of the Stone Age, but still deadly. Improvised explosives, swinging spiked balls, tripwires, single shot cartridges, and snake pits right out of Indiana Jones. I can't even believe that's real. But the most effective were punji pits, or punji sticks. A large hole is dug and bamboo spikes are placed at the bottom. Then, out of pure evil, urine or human excrement is put on the spikes. A thin layer of leaves or cover is placed on the trap, so when someone comes along they would fall in a pit of spikes that if that didn't kill them, an infection from the waste would, or make recovery very, very miserable. That is cruel, man. That ain't right, man. That ain't right, Chief. Number 1. Apocalypse Now. Tiger Force was a long-range reconnaissance unit that later became known for its acts of war crimes. Not sure if there could be war crimes when everyone's doing naughty things, but okay. To quote Martin Sheen in Apocalypse Now, charging someone with murder around here is like handing out speeding tickets at the Indy 500. And like a scene right out of that movie, the members of Tiger Force had a tradition to make necklaces out of ears. I'm going to say that again. They made necklaces out of ears. There are a number of things Tiger Force committed that are honestly just not safe for life. But that's war at the end of the day. War is hell.
Kicking off the list at number 10, A Day in the Life. So as soon as the sun came up, your life as a Civil War soldier began. You would train day in, day out, preparing for battle. It was important that each soldier knew their role to work together as a unit. Now, I would say that there's no time for fun and games, but they always made time to blow some steam off. In between drills, soldiers would do chores just like we do every day. They would cook meals, do laundry, clean gear, and make sure that everything is smooth. Passing the time was done by playing dominoes or poker. Reading was of course a popular way of passing the time as well, but it was a lot harder to get your hands on a book back then, especially when you're running around between marches and battles. So more often than not, soldiers would trade newspapers with their opponents. You would hear about the Christmas peace treaty, but this would happen as well. They would just trade papers. A soldier named Milton Barrett, stationed in the 18th Georgia Volunteers, wrote about this back in 1863. They said, "Our regiment had just come off picket. We stood close together and could talk to each other. Then when the officers were not present, we exchanged papers and bartered tobacco for coffee." They would do it when the officers weren't looking. That's the most intriguing part. They would manage this by using a small boat. Tricky, always a way. The first aerial photograph was back in 1860. James Wallace Black took this photo not by using drones or any bowling alley crazy technology we have today, but rather just a hot air balloon. This lovely landscape is the town of Boston, and you're looking at it from 2,000 feet. This was a long time before selfie sticks. Even longer before that, hot air balloons were being used in warfare. The first account of a hot air balloon being used was The first account of a hot air balloon being used in war was 1794, when the French Committee of Public Safety created the Corps d'Astrociers, which is a hot air balloon squad. They were used in the Battle of Charleroi and Fleurus, and then 70 years later, they were used in the American Civil War. They were pretty large as well. They could fit around 5 guys, where smaller balloons like the Eagle and Excelsior only carried 1 soldier. Those were for stealth flights. That'd be pretty brave. Imagine seeing a hot air balloon coming over the horizon and it has soldiers shooting at you. That's incredible. I didn't hear about any of this growing up. They could reach up to 1,000 feet, so they definitely had a vantage point like no other, and they would communicate with soldiers on the ground using flag signals or, of course, telegraphs. The most successful balloon program in the Union was under the command of Thaddeus Lowe. He and Lincoln were allies, and Lowe actually sent a telegraph to Lincoln once describing the view of Washington from above. Call your friends more and describe your view to them. You might get a few things done. Number 8. Bounty jumpers. Fewer than 150 Union soldiers were killed for desertion, and Lincoln was actually constantly writing letters and endorsements reducing soldier sentences from death to labor during the war. That's how bad it got. Deserters were a big problem for both the Confederate and Union armies, so it was punishable by death. After the Battle of Fredericksburg, the Union had 100 deserters roughly a day. That's a lot, every single day. The Union actually used peer pressure at one point just to keep soldiers from leaving. In 1863, the Union offered regiment perks if a certain percentage of original men were on for a following tour of duty. So soldiers inside were making others stay on board. How they did that, what they said, we don't know. Bounty jumpers were men who were paid to fill in the spot of newly drafted soldiers. So these guys would join for a few days and then desert them all over again and join a new post as the new substitute and get paid. And of course, some deserters were branded to avoid this problem. Number 7. Daily diet. These soldiers were all around 25 years old. The minimum age to join, of course, was 18, but a lot of these guys who were that young would often lie about their age anyways on paper. So on paper, the average was 25 years. But these guys were kids, basically. They ate mostly crackers, and when I say crackers, I don't mean the salty work snacks that you have today. These were made of like flour and water and just salt called hardtack. They would eat berries, nuts, and fruits. Anything they could find is all they had. Most of these soldiers were close to starving to death. Number 6. Soldiers protest. 1/3 of the Union soldiers were immigrants, and 1 in 10 were African American, and those soldiers actually refused their salaries for 18 months to protest being paid lower wages than white soldiers. When black soldiers were signing up in the Union Army in 1863, they were only getting $10 a month, while white soldiers were getting around $13 a month. Officers were getting $700 a month too. It was just insane. To make things even worse, black soldiers were then hit with a $3 monthly cleaning fee, bringing that down to $7 a month now. So a protest was in order and it was held for 18 months, and then come September 1864, black soldiers received equal pay that was retroactive to their enlistment date, so they finally were able to send money back to their families after that long. Number 5. Passing time. You would assume the Civil War and being part of it and everything I've talked about would give you enough anxiety, but gambling was also a common pastime in between battles. And when I say gambling, I don't mean, okay, it's nighttime, let's throw a few bucks down and play dominoes. No, they would gamble on everything. Horse races, chess, euchre, poker, checkers, cards were popular until the end of the Civil War, when of course they were harder to come by, being so flimsy and all. And when dominoes and cards were out of the picture, soldiers would really go old school and play leapfrog. Yeah, games like that were literally all they had. They would wrestle each other for fun, they would have foot races and bet on them. Bowling would be played using cannonballs to knock down wooden pins, and baseball was also played, but it was a little different back then to how we remember it now. The ball was a lot softer, and there were sometimes only 2 bases. The only way you were out also was if you were hit by the ball, hence the softness that I mentioned. Number 4. Coldest winters. With the winter winds rolling in occasionally, soldiers could no longer play baseball outside and peg each other with baseballs, but what you could do was hit each other with snowballs. A little fun, also a little scary. They called it a snow battle. Yeah, a snow battle too. Battle, way more intense. Soldiers would leave with bruises, black eyes, and sometimes even broken bones. Yeah, these guys were blowing off lots of steam, and they would plan attacks and take it obviously seriously, as they did with their daily civil duties. Even officers got in on this action. When pieces of ice were no longer available to large units to throw at one's head, other winter games would include skating and sledding. Number 3. Food March. In April 1863, a group of mostly women led a march to get the governor's attention. The governor at the time, John Letcher, was joined by President Jefferson Davis. It did not end well. The food situation in the South was not great because food prices changed depending on the status of the war. Outcomes of the battle directly affected prices because they were linked to the CSA's currency. That plus the fact that invading troops from the north would often burn crops when they came through, it was getting worse over time. Come April 1863, this march of women broke windows. They flipped carts until eventually they drew out Governor John Letcher and President Jefferson Davis. John Letcher literally started to throw cash at the protesters. Now, they still didn't stop, obviously, that didn't solve problems. It was so bad that the militia almost had to open fire. Number 2, the Alligator. I mentioned soldiers and hot air balloons, so I must mention the United States Navy's first submarine. How fun. This 47-foot long submarine that was paddle powered, yep, you heard me, paddle powered, so you'd be inside and you would do this. We can't call it the USS Alligator because it technically didn't see any active days of combat. In fact, the Alligator, that's what I'll call it, had to be cut loose on its first mission. It was being towed behind the USS Sumter on April 2nd, 1863, right off North Carolina when bad weather hit. The Alligator went down and we haven't found it since. It's still out there. The Alligator is still lurking out there. Only a few months after this new weapon went down, the Confederate States of America launched their own sub, the H.L. Huntley, and it sank the USS Housatonic near the coast of Charleston, officially marking the first time a submarine sank an enemy ship. It also immediately sank afterwards, taking the lives of 8 crewmen, so even in victory, you're not safe. They made history but only enjoyed it for minutes. This is all tragic. Number 1. The wage gap. Hundreds of women joined the Civil War and they did so by looking like men. Yeah, they would pull a she's the man and get to work. But the thing is, like I mentioned before with the CSA's currency being affected by the status of the war, soldiers were getting $13 a month roughly. That's double what a woman could make anywhere on the planet, so they really had no choice but to join. This was long before women's suffrage, so if they thought you were a man, you could use that $13 how you wanted. So it comes to no surprise that women would keep this disguise even after the war ended. In 1909, the US Army officially denied that any woman was ever enlisted in the military service of the United States as a member of any organization of the regular or volunteer army at any time during the period of the Civil War. During the Civil War, though, that was the first time in American history when women all came together in a war effort. Thousands of women from the North and South volunteered as nurses.
Number 10. Live long enough to become the villain. Saigon isn't Saigon anymore, and while many great efforts were made to thwart the Viet Cong, the finger quote good guys lost. There's a little bit of irony in the story, however. Think about it for a second. America was a colony who fought a very hard battle for their independence against the most powerful foreign power at the time. Fast forward to the Vietnam War, and here they are trying to fight a war for independence against the most powerful foreign nation. Different in details, but the same in broader terms. Sadly, it was a tragic loss of life on both sides, and while you always want to pick out the hero in every story, in war, it's not exactly black and white. More of a gray area. Number 9. No more heroes. Looking at photos of soldiers coming home from war, you'll see people hugging, cheering, laughing, kissing, and raising a glass to toast the return of their sons and daughters. There's a famous picture from VJ Day that you've probably seen as a sailor kissing in the streets. However, sadly for Vietnam vets, the return home was not with welcome arms, cheering crowds, or celebrating of any kind, really. The veterans were met with pretty much the opposite. Vietnam was the first war to ever really get the media coverage that it did. For the first time, Americans at home got to see what was going on. And it wasn't pretty. Over time, disapproval for the war grew to the point where it was protested, and soldiers did not receive the care that they needed. As much as we'd like to meme nowadays with Vietnam flashbacks, these soldiers' mental health was not dealt with. PTSD, depression, and a country that didn't want them were very real for shell-shocked men returning home. Number 8. One of many wars. Despite Walter Cronkite and Bob Hope's coverage of the war, and that's kind of a joke for people over the age of 60, Vietnam was a war in a series of armed conflicts during the Cold War. Yes, for Americans it was the most memorable to say the least, but there were many hot wars that took place during the Cold War. I'm not really sure how it got that name, but okay. The Vietnam War was a byproduct of the Cold War, just like these other wars and conflicts. For example, the Ethiopian Civil War, the Ogden War, the Dominican Civil War, the 6 Days War, just to name a few. Vietnam was the last time US forces would fully send troops on the ground like that for at least a few years. All the previous wars I mentioned were more the style of proxy wars. Basically, the United States and Soviet Union would vicariously fight through much smaller, less powerful nations. Basically, it's like getting your big brother to fight for your little brother. Number 7. Rainbow chemicals. Remember the last time when I talked about Agent Orange? Well, there was actually a whole rainbow of colored lethal chemicals used. Orange for trees, Agent Blue to destroy the rice supply, and a few other varieties and colors as well. They became known as the rainbow herbicides. The side effects of these chemicals were horrible, creating birth defects in children whose parents had been exposed. Many people still live with these conditions, and unfortunately, children born today still have birth defects. Clearly, this stuff is awful and should never be used again. I went to the chief's lab last night, and he took a look at the chemicals, and he said, that's not it. Number 6. Ho Chi Minh. The man behind the madness, or at least the communist revolution that he so desperately wanted to take over. Born in 1890 in what was then Indochina, a French colony, his beginnings of being a leader and anti-colonial views started quite young after being expelled from a school for such beliefs. He eventually found his way to France in 1919, where the Treaty of Versailles claimed Vietnamese freedom. His pleas, however, were not heard. A Japanese occupation during World War II and a rise in communism in the East was slowly adding ingredients for a revolution stew. Weird metaphor, but let's run with it. France, wanting to take back their colony, had started the Vietnam War. Now in charge of the communist revolution, it would be a decades-long fight with America and South Vietnam before claiming their bloody victory. Could have been prevented. That's crazy too. Like, he went to France and he's like, give us freedom. They're like, no, sacre bleu, you go back to where you came from. Number 5. Helicopter War. Probably the most iconic iconography of the war is the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, or better known as the Huey. The Vietnam War was the first war to see extensive use of helicopters, and honestly, I'm not sure how Americans would have fought the war without them. One of the main reasons the Viet Cong were successful was because they knew the land. They knew the jungle, and used many tactics to their advantage. Oftentimes, the jungle being their best weapon of defense itself. Even though chemicals and napalm were being used to help unjungle the jungle, it's the extensive use and effectiveness of the Huey helicopter that gave America the technological edge it so needed. For anyone that was actually there, I can just imagine the relief of soldiers that they must have felt when seeing those green beauties come barreling out of the sky. The helicopters turned out to be a great design and was used for many years after the Vietnam War. Number 4. Draft dodging. Grade 12, what a great time to be alive. You're about to graduate. All your friends are excited about spending one last summer together before everyone goes off to college. Maybe you'll spend some time down at the beach, go hang out at the mall, or maybe you'll find a summer fling at a summer party. Nice. And just as you were about to put those bell-bottom jeans on, your mom says you got a letter. Oh no. You just got drafted into the Vietnam War, and it looks like you'll be spending your summer looking for a guy named Charlie in the jungle. That's weird, I wonder where he is. This was a reality for many young Americans who found themselves looking at a piece of paper that either meant they could die in a jungle or be in trouble with the law. However, when option A and B suck, go for C. In this case, that was draft dodging. Americans who received the mandatory volunteer letter fled in decently large numbers to other countries so Uncle Sam couldn't have his way. Many ended up here in Canada. Number 3. Napom Girl. I briefly touched on this in the last part, but Kim Fantee deserves a moment of her own. There's a picture that made it out of the Vietnam War known as Napom Girl. Well, Kim is that girl. Again, we cannot show you the image due to its graphic nature, but it's basically screaming Vietnamese children running down the road after a napalm strike near their location. Unfortunately for Kim, she was an innocent victim of total war. Her clothes were burned off and her skin was severely damaged by napalm, leaving her with scars and reminders of a horrible past. Almost 50 years later, she's still around to tell the story, and how she used faith and forgiveness to forgive those that caused so much pain and destruction to her country and herself. The photograph of Kim is probably the most infamous image of the war, and maybe the 20th century, and is a part of the media coverage that helped inspire Americans to pull out of the war. Number 2. I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. Good old Tricky Dick had just become president, and he had a plan to end the war in Vietnam, but first, they had to invade Cambodia. Why Cambodia? Well, basically the Viet Cong had this genius idea of moving war goods, materials, and troops on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but also moving through Cambodia, which at the time was neutral. The US just wasn't looking there at first. However, when it was realized it would be a tactical good decision to stop that from happening, for poor Tricky Dick, the invasion of Cambodia felt like he was furthering the war rather than trying to bring it to a close. To make matters worse, the Pentagon Papers were leaked, and it was discovered that America had increased involvement and not decreased. The people had had enough, and anti-war movements sparked across the country. It wasn't too long after this that they pulled out of Vietnam. And Cambodia. Number 1. The music. A lot can be said about the Vietnam War, but if sitting through history classes and watching some old movies doesn't paint the picture, then sit down and have a listen to the music that was made during the conflict. A lot to do with counterculture at the time. Once the Vietnam War went into second gear, art began to have its take on the Far East conflict. Books, movies, plays, but nothing more reachable and mainstream as music. The Doors, Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, and the classic CCR. If your thoughts of Vietnam don't feature Fortunate Son by CCR, is it really a thought about Vietnam? I say no. This is kind of disturbing, as when you compare it to music one decade prior, it's completely different. Despite baby boomers causing havoc on minimum wage retail workers today, their music is pretty good and does a good job of depicting the emotions felt in such a grim situation. Yes, I love the music. I love the music of the American people. Number 10. Queen of the Red Sails. In history, when men drop the ball, there's always an iron-willed woman to pick up the slack. Not because a man is telling her to, but because she wants to. How about inheriting a whole pirate fleet from your late husband? Meet Zhang Yisao. Her husband had managed to build quite the little nautical empire, and with his untimely passing, she became the boss. She commanded a fleet of over 400 ships, and estimated between 20 to 60,000 pirates at her peak. She's noted for organizing and uniting pirates into a confederation. She also had some imperial entanglements, having entered conflict with the East India Company and the Portuguese Empire. This is a lot to go through, especially when I get anxiety from being left alone at the cashier at the grocery store. Number 9. Double Trouble. The Trung sisters from Vietnam are still celebrated today because, honey, they went through a lot. The sisters led the first resistance against Chinese dominance, which at the time had lasted over 247 years. Many believe Vietnam wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for their efforts, gathering 80,000 people to join their cause, once killing a tiger and writing a proclamation of war on its hide. They managed to hold off the Chinese forces for 3 years before finally being overtaken. The Trung sisters are a great deal of national pride and pride amongst many women in Vietnam. Sadly, the Chinese proved too strong. But to prevent capture, the sisters later drowned in a last fit of defiance. Number 8. Hell hath no fury. The Roman Empire was just about good at everything. Politics, culture, building a city that would stand the test of time, and eventually outlive their civilization. But perhaps the Romans' strongest attribute was their military. I mean, come on, it's Rome, no introduction is needed here. So when a man was worried that the Romans he had worked with might take over his homeland after he had passed, he left a note in his will saying, "Please do not take this. This is mine, don't take it." I'll give the folks at home a second to think about what the Romans did next. If you guessed annex his homeland and do non-YouTube friendly conduct things to his wife and daughter, you'd be correct. His wife Boudica, not feeling so cool about what happened, took some action by gathering the tribe together and revolting against the Romans. Defeating the scrambled Romans in a battle, she then made her way to Londinium, or what's now London, and had it burned. There were empires that couldn't take down the Roman Empire, and Boudica did it like it was nothing. They did end up losing, and once again to avoid capture drank poison. But come on, she took down the Romans. Number 7. Viva La Revolution. Juana de Paria was born in Spanish-controlled Peru to 2 loving parents. Like many classic stories, her mother sadly passed away when she was young, where she grew very attached to her father. Although unusual for the time, her father instructed her on how to horse ride and sharpshoot. Even helped her father work during the days. They were pretty tight, but like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, there's a double twist. Her father passed away in her teens. Now an orphan, she was forced to move in with her aunt, where she quite possibly developed the very first feelings of teenage angst before there was ever an Avril Lavigne album. Juana would often have outbursts that got her eventually sent to become a nun, where that also did not go very well. During her studies, she was fond of Joan of Arc, but eventually she was expelled at a young age of 17. After years of witnessing colonial reign, she joined the revolution. She became so passionate about the cause, she once fought a battle while pregnant, went back to have a baby, and then went back to battle with the baby strapped to her back. Man, sometimes I don't even want to get up after a large meal. What a woman! Number 6. Not one step back. Ludmila Pavlichenko was just like any other girl in Russia in the 1940s. She was in her last year of university when history's favorite mustache man invaded history's second favorite mustache man. Feeling inspired by her country's call to arms, she signed up for military service. She would eventually find her way to be a sharpshooter. During the siege of Odessa, she is credited with 187 confirmed kills. She married a fellow sniper, he died, then she went on to have over 300 confirmed kills when the war was over. Once the military realized how valuable she was pulled from the front lines, where she became key propaganda for Russia. She would also find herself training young snipers up until the end of the war. She was oftentimes referred to as the Lady of Death. Number 5. The Limping Lady. World War II was the cause and effect for a lot of things. If you like spies and espionage, it's kinda where it all started. One of the best spies who did more than her fair share was Virginia Hall, a lady with a peg leg who thwarted German plans again and again, with her sidekick and peg leg nicknamed Cuthbert. She was credited by top German officials as being the most dangerous spy of all time. In one OSS report, her team is credited with destroying 4 bridges, derailing a freight train, and neutralizing 150 enemies, with hundreds more captured. Now, I'm not a world-class detective or anything, but I feel like if you're trying to find the female spy with a peg leg, it isn't that hard, on account of, some pretty specific identifying features. I don't know how you messed it up. Where is the lady? Where is her? And you hear her walking down the hall, she got a peg leg. What do you mean? Number 4. Miss General. Fuha was one of 60 wives to Emperor Wu Ding, which I'm not sure even Mormons can figure that out. But to avoid obscuring into the background like TV's least favorite sister wife, she took control. According to records, she led many successful military campaigns and commanded an army of 13,000. While stories of the past can get lost, this is most likely true, as her tomb was full of many different weapons like great axes, which was common to bury distinguished generals with at the time. When I'm buried as a warrior princess, I want my collection of pop figures to come with me. I spent too much time on those bad boys to not take them with me to the afterlife. Number 3. Fatality. Tamiris was the queen of Mazagate, or at least I think that's how it's pronounced, a confederation of nomadic tribes that lived east of the Caspian Sea. She ruled during the 6th century BC and is most famous for her vengeful war she waged against the Persian king Cyrus the Great. At first, the war wasn't going too great. Unfortunately, her son claimed his life out of shame for losing in battle. Mom was not happy and promised the bloodiest battle ever. Well, she wasn't lying. As the promised battle was very bloody, many Persians perished in battle, including Cyrus. When his body was recovered, the vengeful queen harnessed the power of mid-90s fighting games and removed his head and turned his skull into a cup and proclaimed, "Drink your fill of blood." Nice. Number 2. The Beautiful Samurai. What does it mean to be a samurai? Armor, a kick-ass sword, and a code of honor? Yes, it does. And Tomoe Gozen did it all and had time to look good doing it. Tomoe Gozen's life is shrouded in mystery and many debate her existence, but whatever be the case, she did leave a mark on history. A very red-stained mark on history. Earning the respect of the men around her, it was stated that she had long black hair and a fair complexion and was in command of a large number of men. However, her biggest claim to fame, when she was approached by multiple foes, she rode right at them, grabbing their leader and liberating his head from his shoulders. Wow, you slay it, queen. Number 1. Who else could it go to but the Maid of Orleans? All the badass women who went through a lot on this list, they seen some stuff, honey. But Joan of Arc, girl, she takes the cake. Joan was born a poor peasant but had a unique gift. She could speak to the gods. And the gods told her it was her time to shine. By the time she was 19, she had led thousands of men to battle and in glorious victory. Charles VII, losing the 100 Years' War at the time, said, "Alright, sure, send the girl to fight. What have we got to lose?" Well, they actually had a lot to win. Once Joan had gotten involved, the French began to win victory after victory, and her claims of being guided by God didn't seem so far-fetched after all. The British, being so shaken up by the young girl's military prowess, thought she had been possessed by the devil. The British, not liking losing war to a teenage girl, decided to treat her with compassion by keeping her warm with a fire while she was tied to a wooden post. Joan would later become a legend for her efforts, because getting burned at the stake is honestly a lot and I can't even deal.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Sir William Wallace. You've probably heard of this famous Scotsman at some point, you just may not even realize it. Sir William Wallace was born in 1270. His participation in the First Scottish War of Independence rightfully puts him on this list. And if you saw the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson, you know exactly who I'm talking about. He rose to prominence in 1297 when he organized troops on the battlefield to go against the English army. Now, while some warriors on this list are more physical, and don't get me wrong, Sir William Wallace could easily punch my head off of my body any day, his feat came mostly from a strategic standpoint. Wallace was a motivator, in case you missed the movie. Number 9, Alexander the Great. Considered one of the finest generals to ever live. Alexander the Great, his name is pretty great, you for sure have heard about him at some point or another. The Great King conquered most of the world, or what was known of it at the time, and he was young too. He died when he was just 33 years old, but don't let his age distract you. Alexander the Great fought on the front lines of every single battle, instead of other kings who would just watch from the back and eat grapes in their pajamas. He took over huge kingdoms. He took over Persia, India, and of course Egypt. In his 15 years of ruling, he never lost a single battle. He named 70 cities after himself, even naming one after his horse, Bucephala. How he died, we're still trying to figure that out. All we know is that it was in 323 BC, and he drank a bunch of wine, got sick, and then 2 weeks later, was dead. The wine back then was pretty bad though. It wasn't like, oh, Merlot, you do like that whole sniff test. It wasn't like that. It was like in a bucket. It was gross. Number 8, Leonidas. One of the kings of Sparta. If you've seen the classic film 300, remember that one with the whole chest kicking to the big pit thing? That was that movie. Leonidas was the leader of said 300 Spartans. Legend has it he was the last one standing after the Battle of Thermopylae, and he took on hundreds of thousands of Persian soldiers before meeting his own fate. He was the king of Sparta from 490 BC until 480. He lost the battle, but history will continue to tell his story, because it's exactly the type of hero that belongs on this list. Not really hero, just more of like, how did they survive this far and this long? How did they do all this? As soon as Leonidas realized the Persian soldiers had this one, he sent away his entire army. He wanted to save them all. All left, but you guessed it, 300 of them. They vowed to stay with the king until the very end, and so they did. These warriors had massive shields, spears, iron swords, and they used a formation called a phalanx, which was just shields overlapping each other with spears poking out. It's actually really intimidating. I can't imagine actually having to run towards this. No chance. I'd be like, hi, I'm done. Like paintball, I'm like, just put my hand up. I'm like, nah, I'm out, they got me, we're good. Number 7, Julius Caesar. One of the most famous generals in history. Julius Caesar was a military leader who rose up through the Roman Republic, and then once at the top, Rome was never the same. His rule lasted not even a year before his rivals got the best of him. When Caesar was in his mid-20s, he was abducted by pirates. He was on his way to Rome for the island of Rhodes, but when he was taken, Caesar was insulted at how low the ransom fee was. He was encouraging these pirates to jack up his own price. Could you imagine that? He was assuring them they can get a much higher price, and they did. But the thing was, Caesar was also pretty ruthless. After the higher ransom was paid, Caesar went back with some ships and a few choice words. When Caesar was stabbed 23 times, one of the attackers was actually the son of a woman named Servilia. She was one of his many mistresses alongside Cleopatra VII. He slept around, and in turn, Servilia's son, Marcus Brutus, helped end the general's life in 44 BC. Number 6, Richard the Lionheart. Richard I, famous for battling Saladin during the Crusades. When he turned 31, he succeeded his father to the throne, and of course there was pressure to produce an heir to the kingdom, but Richard had no interest in dating or settling down with anybody or anything like that. So instead, the role of the queen was taken up by his mother, Eleanor Aquitaine. Richard the Lionheart deserves a spot on this list purely on the fact that he probably met Robin Hood. Yeah, imagine this. At the end of every Robin Hood story, Richard returns to punish John. John in real life, of course, was his brother. He was also kind of the worst. He had Richard imprisoned. Richard had to actually sneak back into his own home in disguise. Remember those days? I had to sneak back into my own house a few times. Little late night rendezvous. You gotta take your time with those sliding glass doors. You almost have to like lift it a bit and then just like move with it. I had 2 dogs too, so that was like Mission Impossible level. Number 5. Alaric the Barbarian. Going back to around 400 CE, this leader was one leading the fall of Rome. Alaric the Barbarian trained in the Roman army and eventually led the Gothic troops. They fought with the Romans, but after Rome divided and all, the Barbarian fought against them. He ruled over the Goths, he was their first king, and then he sacked Rome. So a pretty big couple years there. After Rome, the Barbarian moved on to parts of Africa, and while his plans were far from being thwarted, the weather always wins. His ships were destroyed in a storm, so Alaric the Barbarian was forced to admit defeat this time around. Number 4, Spartacus. The famous gladiator, of course we had to talk about him. Born in 109 BC, he joined the Roman army as a wee young lad, but down the road when he tried to leave, he was caught and forced into the life of a gladiator. There's a certain word that I can't say, but he was one of those. He was forced to fight for the name of entertainment. The movie Gladiator, I mean, if you haven't seen the movie Gladiator, watch it. It's a masterpiece. I give it 2 thumbs down. Get it? Because Romans did the... We got it. We'll move on. He was forced to fight animals and other warriors, but just like he did earlier with the Roman army, he didn't want to fight anymore. He was done. He wanted a way out, especially in these horrible conditions. So come 73 BC, 70 gladiators led by Spartacus himself all made a break for it. They stole weapons from inside and then broke out. I like how I said to watch the movie and then I immediately spoiled the movie. My bad. I mean, you had 21 years, but sorry. Number 3. Genghis Khan. Famous for uniting the tribes of Mongolia in the 12th century, Genghis Khan soon conquered most of the Asian continent. The head count that he and his Mongolian horde reached, I mean, we're talking tens of millions here. It's really hard to do a list of warriors who went through a lot and then also talk about Genghis Khan because he killed so many people. It's really tough to break down how fierce he is without sounding like I'm glorifying the dude. He did most of the fighting on horseback. He would actually use a composite bow or a battle axe. The actual training itself under Genghis Khan's ruling was, as you'd expect, quite brutal. Younger folk would have to learn how to use all types of weaponry. Number 2. Adrian Cardin de Wyatt. 6 decades and 4 wars later, Adrian Cardin de Wyatt has survived the impossible multiple times. I gotta throw him on the list because it's more recent and also listen to this. He's considered one of the most dedicated soldiers of all time because for starters, after he lost his left hand and left eye, Adrian did not retire. Instead, no, the officer went on to experience 10 more horrible injuries. He cheated death that many times. As World War I broke out in November 1914, Cardin was serving with the Somaliland Camel Corps opposing the forces of the Dervish state. Now he was shot in the arm first and then the face, and that's how he lost his eye. But a grim detail shared by Lord Ismay, who served alongside the soldier, said in 1964 the doctor at the time couldn't do anything about his eye, like at all. So he must have been in the worst pain, but still, that was the first injury. He kept going with that eye thing on top of all this. After the incident, Adrian relocated to Europe where even more action was waiting. He received more gunshot wounds, this time in the head, hand, stomach, groin, leg, ankle, you name it. If that's not inspiring enough, he survived numerous plane crashes and also a broken back. And finally, number 1, Scanderbeg. Named by the Pope as the champion of Christ, okay, Scanderbeg is one of the most important individuals in Albanian history. He was originally raised as a hostage in the Ottoman Empire, but over time he became one of their top military commanders. Now come 1443, the plan changed. The once captured Scanderbeg turned on the empire. He went back to fighting on the Albanian side. One of his most notable features here was his involvement in the conflict between Islam and Christianity. Because of his training at a young age, he was fearless. He would lead his troops again from the front line. He wouldn't sit back and watch. No one's sitting back and watching on this list, except for you. Hit that thumbs up. If you want to see a piece of history in person, you can see Scanderbeg's sword sitting in a museum in Vienna. So book that flight.
Number 10, hold the mustard, please. World War I cannot be talked about without talking about the crazy advancements in technology. Seemingly, nations and empires were just itching to try them out on each other. Airplanes, tanks, blimps, machine guns, mostly fairly new and extremely lethal. However, the life of a World War I soldier cannot be talked about without talking about mustard gas or chemical weapons. In 1907, major world players agreed to ban chemical weapons from warfare. So you can understand the confusion by Allied soldiers on the Second Battle of Ypres when over 150 tons of chlorine gas were released. A terrible weapon that would cause trouble breathing, burns, and vomiting. It was so effective that the Allies immediately began working on their own chemical weapons and gas masks to prevent the effects of this supervillain level weapon. I think this quote by World War II General MacArthur sums it up. Whoever said the pen is mightier than the sword obviously never encountered automatic weapons. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. Number 9, all quiet on the Western Front. This is kind of obvious, but people die in war. In World War I, a lot of people died, and a lot of these young men and comrades in arms formed bonds with one another, only to have those friends and brothers be killed and taken away from each other. Over 2 million German soldiers would perish in the First World War, which later would have all kinds of disastrous effects on the country, especially with the rise of Evil Mustache Man. France also lost a similar amount of men. Trench warfare was brutal, and I'll get to that shortly. One of my favorite books and movies, actually, All Quiet on the Western Front, depicts a group of young German boys who are in this thing together. all while having a strong anti-war message, or at least questioning the legitimacy of the First World War. Just make sure when you're in the trenches, no one's handing you those fresh new boots. It's an omen. Number 8. 1-star review. It may come as a surprise to some of you, but living in the trenches on the Western Front wasn't a super fun time. We don't recommend it here at Bumblebee. If you're like me, then you love a good hearty meal. Like my mom always said, I'm a meat and potato kind of guy. That's just how it goes. A nice grilled rare steak, roasted garlic potatoes, and a freshly tossed crisp lettuce Caesar salad. Ooh, that sounds amazing. I'm kind of hungry now. And maybe a beer or two to wash it down. Just a classic meal for a classic guy that I really enjoy. Sadly for the boys in the trenches, this could not have been further from reality. Anyone in the military today with our modern technology will tell you how delicious MRE rations are. But for soldiers of the First World War, rations were limited. And as time went on, especially on the German side, where in 1918 rations were whittled down to turnip soup and turnip bread. Ugh. There were still beer rations. However, and if I'm going to be shot at, I still want a little ale to cure what ails me. You know what I'm saying? Go a long way. Number 7. Trench living. I know after a long day of work, most folks like to kick back and relax. A nice warm house, a cold beer, maybe the game's on. You come home to a family that loves you. The life of a soldier in World War I was more of the horrific variety. Basically, you live in a deep hole that stretches for miles and interconnects with tunnels and other trenches. It's freezing cold in the winter, blistering hot in the summer. Rain's right on top of you, and the mud. Oh, the mud is an issue. Bogged down in a muddy hole, wet freezing with other miserable men who are also wet and freezing. Just not a fun time for anyone involved. I love winter and a good rainstorm here and there, but the difference is I get to come out of the cold after a long day making snow angels or jumping in puddles. The impending doom and being soaking wet would damper anyone's mood. Number 6. Disease in a time of plague. While living in a trench for long periods of time may suck, there's other things besides spooky spiked helmeted Germans waiting to kill you. Bullets, bombs, and artillery are lethal, but you had a very high chance of dying from disease. A lot of these trenches became isolated from supply lines for multiple reasons, and sometimes could be a logistical nightmare, meaning supplies were oftentimes difficult to come by. But no amount of supply could fix the disgusting living conditions of the trenches. Soldiers claimed by the war would often just rot, as recovering fallen comrades was made difficult in trench warfare, making diseases very easy to catch. Besides influenza and typhoid, the most common sickness would be trench foot, or gangrene, where really the only thing to treat it is a trip to the medic's hut with a saw blade to amputate your foot, in which is a pain I cannot even begin to imagine. No thank you. You ever seen 127 Hours? It's kind of the same thing. Number 5. Of rats and men. The trenches were a messed up place to be for a human being. Seriously, I can't recommend it to anyone. But for a small rodent creature like a rat, it may as well be Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas. As a rat, you had access to food scraps, shelter, and everything a growing rat needs. They breed like crazy and had become commonplace amongst the soldiers and decaying bodies sinking in the hellish mud. The rats grew bigger and bolder, with some cases of rats stealing food right out of soldiers' hands. Sometimes there was so many that soldiers had to essentially hunt them in order to cull the numbers, as there was no system for removing them entirely. On a brighter note though, some soldiers kept them as pets to keep their minds off the impending doom of World War I and trench combat. So you know what, that's kind of cool. Get a little rat friend. I'll call him Ralph. I don't know why. Ralph's a cool name. Number 4. No Man's Land. This is what all the chaos is about. The part most soldiers quivering in their boots fear. Maybe it's better to stay with the rats and corpses and freeze. Most soldiers are waiting for one sound. That means two things. A whistle blowing means you're going over the top, or the enemy is coming to you. Either way, someone is going to have to cross no man's land, which is the space between two opposing trenches defended on either side with barbed wire, mines, and machine guns, waiting to cut down the enemy charging at full speed. No Man's Land earns its grim nickname as the bodies that fall out there will stay there and become a part of the battlefield. Rolling artillery barrages were meant to aid soldiers in crossing No Man's Land, but no amount of help, liquid courage, or any other factor could really prepare you for that first leap of faith, climbing over the top and facing the enemy. Number 3. Humanity. While a lot of soldiers met their demise to the new inventions of the war like chemical weapons and improved artillery, trench warfare brought out the worst in humanity. The idea of going over the top was to take the enemy trench. Doing so would move the front line up. A war of inches, if you will. However, you cannot take the enemy trench if the enemy is still there. And that is where the bayonets come in, gentlemen. Horrific as it may be, once you made it into the trenches, the warfare looked more like Stone Age fighting than modern. Swords, knives, rifles in close range, clubs, mallets, and homemade blunt objects, and sometimes fists, were used in an intimate setting of a muddy trench just to kill each other, often being some of the most brutal and intense fighting of the war. Even after all that, taking the trench was difficult, but defending it was more, as oftentimes armies went back and forth trying to break enemy lines in between trenches. No thanks. Number 2, sharks with frickin' laser beams. Okay, I know the title's a little misleading, but hear me out. Airplanes and aviation had only been invented a few years prior, or at least a modernized version of them. So humans gained the ability to fly, something people of the past could only dream of. So what's the first thing humans do to this amazing revolutionary invention? Can we weaponize this? Yeah, it's kind of messed up to think about, but when we gained the ability to fly, one of the first real uses we used it for was to destroy each other. Airplanes did play a crucial role in World War I, but not just for ace pilots like the Red Baron, but for reconnaissance. At least the tank was designed for military application. Leave it up to us to strap an automatic weapon and bombs to one of the greatest gifts ever given to mankind. And the sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their frickin' heads are the same energy. I think so, at least. Number 1, Merry Christmas. This would honestly confuse me if I was a soldier in World War I. It would make me question a lot of things. Things like, why am I here freezing and dying? And shooting at people I don't really have an issue with. The Christmas Truce of 1914 was a truce by the Entente and the Central Powers, more specifically on the Western Front, who climbed out of their trenches to shake hands and share a moment of peace on Christmas. The soldiers, for the most part, got along swimmingly. What's messed up is a few days later, they were back at it again with blowing up and destroying each other. Personally, I don't know how you could do that after sharing a beer with somebody. Just doesn't make any sense. Number 10, Not Till the Fat Lady Sings. Most people would be delighted to know that a war is over. War sucks, it's expensive, costs lives, and come on man, it just sucks. Officially, North and South Korea have not signed a peace treaty. That's right. Although they both agreed to an armistice in 1953, on solid paper, there's no surrender, which technically means they're still at war. This sounds bad, but it can't be, right? Not as if tensions between these two could ever be high. It's not as if they're scheming of ways to undermine each other and just waiting for an excuse to open the biggest can of whoop ass at a minute's notice, right? Everything's fine. I don't know if everything's fine. Number 9. Up and down. The Korean War was a great military success and everyone went home happy. Very nice, great success. Just kidding, actually. It didn't really solve anything. What's so messed up is everyone just kinda ended up where they started. North Korea had pushed into the south, almost making it all the way south, when the very effective UN organized a police force of multiple nations, mostly US, and punched their way back up to the 38th parallel. But maybe we better go further, ballsy General MacArthur Douglas said to himself, admiring his own reflection in the mirror, pushing their way all the way up to the Chinese border, where 250,000 Chinese soldiers helped the UN force by pushing them back down to the 38th parallel, putting everyone in the same position they were in the beginning. It's almost as if war was the pointless cost of life. Nah, that can't be, right? No. Number 8, Nuclear Threequel. This one is kinda scary, honestly. So, during the Korean War's impression of snakes and ladders, game of borders, and front lines changing like the wind, General MacArthur was getting frustrated with the progress, or lack thereof. He wanted a quick solution. Something that would bring a swift end to the conflict, all while flexing a little muscle in the process. Being a big fan of how the US annihilated 2 cities in Japan in the previous war, he proposed that America once again just start dropping nukes Fallout style. While this was being considered, it was ultimately a no-calzone situation, as I like to call it, for the US and the UN. Soviet Russia had just figured out the recipe for nuclear bombs, and would not hesitate to send one their way in return. The US had lost its nuclear monopoly and ushered in the age of mutually assured destruction. And thank God they didn't, to be honest. I love playing the Fallout games, but that doesn't mean I actually want to be in them. Nah, thanks, man. I'm good. I'm good, dude. Number 7, I need a hero. When we all tell stories, we like to tell stories with heroes and villains, beginnings, middles, ends, rising actions, climax, and conclusion. Bad guy hurts good guy perseveres, and he beats bad guy. Credits roll as the hero walks off into the sunset. Now, I'd like to tell you that the Korean War was a tale of good versus evil. but it's more like bad versus evil. Korea was split between Communist North, supported by China and the Soviet Union. The South was supported by the UN and the US. Each has their own dictator wanting to unify Korea in their own image. Yes, the communists were not very nice, but the right-wing dictator installed by the US was arguably just as bad. So in short, a super awesome time to be in Korea. Number 6. Tootsie Slide. This one goes out to all the fans of MacGyver, you're gonna love this one. So during a very cold segment of the Korean War known as the Chosen Mountain, nicknamed Frozen Chosen by the very cold Marines that were stationed there. Temperatures were below -25°C and morale was lower. Well, actually their ammo count was. So the Marines radioed in an airdrop for Tootsie Rolls, which was just a code name they had given to mortar shells. Apparently the radio operator receiving this message did not understand this, and the actual chocolate candy Tootsie Roll was airdropped to the Marines instead. Yeah. Not wanting to waste this processed American delicacy, Americans went full MacGyver and discovered that once chewed and placed in bullet holes or in things that needed to be filled, the treat made for a decent enough repair. If women don't find you handsome, they should at least find you handy. Number 5. Stranger Danger. We all know if there's a van that rolls up to your neighborhood and there's a man inside offering free candy, it's gonna be a bad time. Well, North Korea might have had the biggest and baddest van in the neighborhood, as it's estimated that 84,000 people were kidnapped during the war. That is so many people. Why was North Korea putting so many faces on the side of milk cartons, you ask? Well, it was mainly a forced repopulation tactic, which again is so messed up, I can't even begin to tell you how wrong that is, but also may have been the beginning of a super secret spy program, where North Korea was interested in having biracial spies, making it easier to infiltrate the enemy. Just one of many nefarious activities North Korea has been up to. There is no spy program in North Korea, and I am not saying, I am absolutely saying this of my own free will. Please do not send help. Number 4. Not actually a war. While there were a lot of bang bang shooty shooty killy killy during the Korean War, technically it wasn't really a war, even though it feels like one. Being referred to as a police matter. Yeah, the US sent a lot of troops to fight this not war, which in case you're wondering how that's possible, you can take a look at Congress, as Congress never declared war, setting a new precedent. Although after the millions of dollars spent, the loss of thousands of soldiers on each side, plus the UN force being comprised of 16 other nations, I'm not exactly sure how it's not a war. That's like me saying I did not do my English essay because it's not an English essay. It's a 2-page opinionated piece that should be 4 pages, but I didn't read the book and just used Cliff Notes. Sorry, Mrs. M. I mean, come on, can you blame me? Have you ever actually tried to sit down and read Lord of the Flies? Not in a school setting? I called the chief last night, you know what? He said it wasn't it. Number 3. Top Gun. Ask any military history guru or anyone who's got a thing for it and they will tell you that after World War II, military tech was about to get a little crazy. On September 8th, 1950, something a little spicy happened in regards to both military and aviation history. The world's first all-jet dogfight took place. Americans in F-80s and communists piloting the infamous MiG. Despite a movie that I actually think isn't very good, this wasn't great for the Americans. Yes, they did end up shooting down the enemy, but it was clear that the MiG was outperforming the F-80. Forced American aviation to come up with something just a little bit better. Come on guys, you can do it. Number 2. Just in case. So it's been years since the Korean War. They've been split in half. DMZ is there. Everything's kosher, right? Well, not exactly. If you followed the news in recent years, you know that North Korea has been doing some unsavory testing with ballistic missiles. However, what some people may not know, and it's kind of messed up when you think about it, is to this day there is still a large number of US soldiers stationed in South Korea. 30,000 to be exact. A remnant from the Korean War, but something that many would consider to be a necessity given the hostile nature of the North Korean regime. Hopefully things stay in a stalemate and don't escalate. We got enough problems on our hands right now. On a side note, there's also a large concentration of US soldiers in Japan as well. Not directly related to the Korean War, but they are in close proximity just in case anything sneaky happens. Okay. Number 1. Big boom, little changes. World War I changed lives. It dissolved century-old empires, completely redrew the map. World War II doesn't happen without World War I, and it was so bad, the whole world swore to never let that happen again. Heck, even wars from centuries ago had more cause and effect. The Korean War is very different in this regard. Like previously mentioned, the communists were bad, but the capitalists were not much better. While the lines may not be as blurred as some wars, the outcome was completely different to what most people were used to. When World War II ended, there was cheering in the streets. When the Korean War ended, there just wasn't much to show for it, besides a tragic loss of life, debt, and a new theory about communism that would literally make the exact same thing happen in Vietnam 15 years later. Seriously, the comparisons are uncanny. It's like the exact same thing. Number 10. The Cold War. Some of our viewers may have lived through the times classified as the Cold War, but let me clarify for anyone who doesn't know or was too deep into hippie culture to remember what the heck was going on. And honestly, it's pretty messed up. So in a nutshell, after World War II ended, Germany was split into two. One side, capitalist allies, the other, communist Soviet Union. Russia was an ally during World War II, but this relationship quickly deteriorated. The two political and economic ideologies would grow distaste for one another and would compete politically, economically, and most fearfully with their militaries. The United States being the superpower on the one side and the Soviet Union on the other. They spread their views, a lot of times by force, until almost the entire world was divided by the two styles of government, lasting from 1945 all the way up until MTV was still good, around the mid-90s. When the Soviet Union was dissolved. That's a lot of history to unpack here, so I'm gonna do my best to tell you some crazy facts and to make you laugh. I'm a comedian, it's what I do. Number 9. Charlie in the trees. We've talked about Vietnam a few times on this channel, but I can't stress this enough. It was messed up for many people, Americans and Vietnamese alike. As a Canadian, we mostly dodged that hairy situation. While the Vietnam War was America's worst war since World War II, and the most costly in terms of lives and budget, it was not the only conflict. Vietnam was probably the hottest war of the Cold War, but there's many other little things that make this such an interesting time. France had spent years trying to reclaim their colony, and with no luck. America being there for a total legit reason of containment also didn't have much luck, especially after 1968. Refer to our Vietnamese war videos, they're pretty good. Lives lost, lessons learned, and hopefully somebody found Charlie. I swear in every movie they're always looking for a guy named Charlie. I guess we never find him, I don't know. Number 8. The name's Bond. James Bond. It would be difficult to talk about the Cold War without talking about espionage and spies. While not to the exaggerated level the 007 series likes to take things with its, well, little people and lethal hat throwing, there was still, however, a ton of black ops going on behind the scenes. You only have to look at the superpower spy agencies, the CIA and the KGB. Both agencies went on globe-trotting clandestine operations to gather information, sabotage, and just about anything else James Bond would do. Stealth, spy gadgets, and missions to save the world. All martini shaken, of course, not stirred. Just like Bond, except the whole womanizing thing. Or maybe there was, as the Soviets would often use women's alluring good looks to produce results they so wished for. Ah yes, thanks to beautiful female agent sleeping a lot, thank you, we now know we are one step closer to discovering the Colonel's secret herbs and spices. Our chicken shall have flavor soon. Number 7, Fallout. Probably the heaviest underlying theme of the Cold War was the constant and looming threat of nuclear annihilation. The US got smart in the end of 1945 and developed and used the world's first atomic bombs. This was great for America, not so great for Japan. America was feeling mighty high. That was until the Soviet Union developed their own shortly after. Now it wasn't so cool anymore. Both sides were worried that further escalation of any issue in the Cold War would lead to mutually assured destruction, rendering the bombs the most destructive weapon on Earth and also the most useless. And to be fair, there was a good chance of that happening. There were multiple instances of escalation where the world watched on as the two superpowers were about to end it all. Finna act up because they wanted their politics to be number 1. I'ma act up. Number 6, Space Race. No, the space race is not a race on how many special brownies that you can eat and see how fast it takes you to space out. Remember grade 10, right? I know. What it actually was a race to see who could develop the best and fastest space age technology and advancements. Which, if you study economics, could be a good thing. Healthy competition driven by new technology. In reality, it kinda sucked though. In the 1950s, Russia launched the first satellite, the Sputnik. Which to America was scary because it's America. We never lost anything. The Soviet Union would follow up with the first animal in space and then the first man. Some experiments unfortunately never made it back in one piece. America then trumped them back by landing on the moon. Now what's so messed up? Well, for the Soviet Union, this began to put a severe dent in their economy. All the spending on space and military was having an effect on their people. In a nutshell, it made them broke. And if you want to figure out what style of government is better, well, the US has Las Vegas, Russia has beets, and turnips, and depressed artists. Number 5, the Korean War. A war that is frankly just not talked about enough, and sadly I feel like the veterans don't get enough praise, so thank you. Now back to the mildly funny content. Korea was finding itself in quite a pickle. The same pickle that 40 other nations throughout the Cold War would find themselves in. Capitalism and communism were going to have a fight in their backyard. And it was going to be costly. Both sides supported their own not so nice dictator, and a bloody conflict ensued. Despite the UN and US efforts, and despite the Chinese and Soviet efforts, things kinda ended in the worst stalemate ever. As even today the tensions exist, Korea remains split in two by the ideologies. And North Korea is still a little crazy. Just a little bit. Number 4, up and away. Back when history's second favorite mustache man, Joseph Stalin, was in charge, things were kind of oppressive. They were just really oppressive, actually. It was bad. Where were the Karens when we needed them to stand up to the actual oppression? When Germany was split into cool and not so cool Germany, the division between its citizens was becoming clear. And the people on the capitalist side were just living better. As life is better when you can walk into a German 7-Eleven and purchase a Slim Jim, cigarettes, Mountain Dew, and a reputable magazine with lewd centerfolds. You know the one. So Mustache Man, feeling confident after getting rid of history's favorite mustache man, blocked roads and trains from Berlin in hopes that the West would give in to his demands. And in pure teenage defiance, the West began to fly in supplies daily. 12,000 tons of goods daily. That's a lot of centerfolds, my guy. Number 3, the man who saved the world. Vasily Arkhipov, not a name I reckon my humble bumblebees are familiar with. Well, why is this man so important? He's one of the reasons why you're not watching this video from the comfort of a concrete bunker. During the totally non-controversial Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a Russian submarine with a Russian submarine commander. All Sean Connery jokes aside, the sub had nuclear capabilities. What's even scarier than that is due to some rising tensions and miscommunication, the bane of every good relationship, 3 out of 4 keys had been turned and were waiting on Vasily's response. Those were keys to launch nukes, by the way. Maybe it was his bleeding Russian heart, or his strong will to save mankind. Or it could have been nuclear radiation warping his brain and body due to a previous mishap on the sub. But regardless, he said nay, and the nuclear war was avoided. Thank goodness. I hope that never happens again. Whew. I think it happened again. Number 2, Broken Arrow. What is scarier than the uncertain destruction of society as we know it? And trust me, nuclear fire would be a bad way to go. I don't want to grow another third arm. The first one was difficult to get rid of. Well, how about not knowing at all where the bombs are? Sure, you wouldn't really see one until there was a mushroom cloud over your favorite vegan restaurant, and by then it would just be too late. But what I'm talking about is devices that got lost in the mail or just lost by the military. And yes, it's happened multiple times through the decades. One incident where a device was lost from a crashed plane and 3 out of the 4 safeties had been failed. That's a little too close for comfort. But of the declassified incidents the US is willing to tell you about, the Soviet Union has never said how many they lost. Just one of those comforting facts to keep both sides of your pillow warm at night. Начальник сказал, что не так. Number 1, happy ending. There were tons of things to talk about during the Cold War. Seriously, you'd need a historian and a few textbooks to break everything down. However, when you boil down the main events, what was it really for? All that tension and stress. Nuclear war is just on the horizon. Years of arms racing and flinging people into the atmosphere faster than you can say, look out Ukraine. A lot of things changed and a lot didn't. To me, it just seems like it's such a waste of money and time to have all those world enders collecting dust somewhere under an onion-shaped building. Russia has some onion-shaped buildings. I'm just assuming that's where they are. I'm hungry at this point. The point I'm making is, let's keep the nuking to the fat man and Fallout, the video game, not real life. Let's just be peaceful.
Number 10. Minamoto no Yoshitsune. Born to the Minamoto clan, just as the Heian period was falling apart, Yoshitsune escaped the murder of his father and brothers during the Heiji Rebellion. He'd be placed in the care of monks at Kurama Temple, where he'd learn to use a sword and, more importantly, his mind. Leaving the temple, the stories of Yoshitsune drift between fact and fiction. Some works of art depicting him defeating a bandit by the name of Kumasaka at the age of 15. What is held as truth is his friendship with Benkei, a warrior monk who was defeated by Yoshitsune in a friendly duel. The two would then join the Genpei War, Yoshitsune joining his brother Yoritomo, who had become head of the clan. After the war, his brother would become jealous of him, causing Yoshitsune to flee Kyoto until he was cornered and forced to fight Benkei. Supposedly, he was pressured into committing seppuku, though there is some debate on this, as the Ainu, the Japanese long-maligned indigenous peoples, hold a historical account of Yoshitsune escaping to Hokkaido. Number 9. Kunisoki Masahige. Active in the Kamakura period, Kunisoki was known for his contributions to the Kenmu Restoration in 1333. While his origins are generally unclear, it's agreed upon that he was a member of the gentry before his rise to fame. His career was spent mostly in the service of Emperor Go-Daigo in a war to overthrow the Kamakura shogunate, with the end goal of returning power to the rule of the emperor. Despite Kunisoki's tactical brilliance, Go-Daigo was kind of stupid, and a tactical error during a crucial battle led to Kunisoki's demise. His famous last words were, "Would that I had 7 lives to give for my country." Fittingly, he currently has 2 wickedly cool statues, one in front of the temple Kashinji, and the other in front of the current Japanese Imperial Palace. Number 8. Kondo Isami. A member of the Shinsengumi, Kondo Isami started life as a relatively well-known scholar and exceptional swordsman. He then rose to fame after a gang of thieves broke into his family home, which he supposedly defeated single-handedly. From there, he was trained as a swordsman, but wouldn't see action until the establishment of the Shinsengumi, where he was established as a teacher of swordsmanship and eventually made a full member. From there, he was embroiled in the conflict born from the dissolution of the Tokugawa shogunate, and while the Shinsengumi were disbanded, at that point he managed to retain a similar rank and title. From there, he was essentially forced on the back foot, and in 1868, Kondo was captured and executed under the pretense of having murdered Sakamoto Ryoma. Number 7. Sakamoto Ryoma. Mastering the sword at a young age, Sakamoto worked as a teacher of kenjutsu until the political situation in Japan took a turn for the worse. Sakamoto joined a number of anti-shogunate forces, and is credited with a number of assassination attempts, some of which did succeed, though he was known as someone who generally believed that the shogun should serve the people. He would later be assassinated by a group of attackers, who slaughtered Sakamoto and his friend Nakaoka Shintaro. The Shinsengumi was accused of the murder, leading to Kondo Isami's execution. A pro-shogun group called Miwari Gumi would confess to the murder 3 years later, but the true assassin was never found. Sakamoto's gained fame as something of a Clint Eastwood-style character in modern fiction ever since. Number 6. Yasuke. While Japan was famed for its isolation, there were many ports in which trade did occur. One of these trades was the slave trade, where Nobunaga happened upon a man who would have been extremely peculiar to his eyes. Yasuke's exact origins are unknown, but as most of the slaves traded in the area were originally from Mozambique, it's generally a solid theory that he'd have come from there, specifically the people of Yao, though others claim that Sudan and Ethiopia could have served as his homeland just as well. Either way, Nobunaga was introduced to Yasuke, originally thinking that his skin must have been painted. Accompanying a missionary, Yasuke learned Japanese and eventually became a retainer of Nobunaga, becoming the warlord's weapon bearer. We'll get more into Nobunaga later, but Yasuke was known to have been with him at the end of the warlord's life. Beyond that, Yasuke's fate is unknown, as the traitor Akechi did not kill him for quoted reasons that are gross and kind of racist, and I will not say because ew. Number 5. Hijikata Toshizo. Back to the Shinsengumi. Hijikata joined the Shinsengumi alongside Kondo, where he rose his way to the title of Vice Commander. He was famed for rooting out corruption within his organization, and his dedication to the role was so great that he refused marriage on the pretense of how dangerous it would be for his wife. Keeping the group in line, they would join the Boshin War. During Kondo's capture, Hijikata would attempt to appeal Kondo's innocence, but was repeatedly denied. Fearing the collapse of the Tokugawa, Hijikata led one final raid to steal the warship Kotetsu, where the swordsmen were repelled by the ship's crew and a Gatling gun. Driven to Hakodate before the closing of the war, he instructed his page to dedicate a poem of his death. Though my body may decay on the island of Ezo, my spirit guards my lord in the east. He was later killed, shot while riding on horseback. The Shinsengumi surrendered and was disbanded. Number 4. Tomoe Gozen. Another warrior active during the late Heian period, Tomoe was one of Japanese history's few women warriors. She served under Yoshinaka, leading 300 samurai to victory against 200 Taira warriors in 1182. Clashing with Yoritomo, they lost the battle, Yoshinaka sending Tomoe away while claiming that he'd be ashamed to die with a woman. Smooth. From there, accounts and details become muddy. Apparently she just went on a rampage, killing at least 3 major samurai before escaping. One story goes that she was captured and made to wed the soldier Wada Yoshimori, and after his death in 1213, she made her way to a temple and became a monk, living until 91. Other stories claim that she committed seppuku, and more stories yet claim that she took her lord's head, walking into the sea with it to serve him in the afterlife. Any of these could be true, and personally I think the last one is really metal, so that'd be my headcanon. Number 3. Toyotomi Hideyoshi. We're getting into the big boys here. Originally beginning his career under Nobunaga, Hideyoshi would avenge his lord and assume authority. Constructing Osaka Castle, Hideyoshi would then engage in a series of campaigns against the Katsui and Ieyasu clans, creating the clan of Toyotomi. From there, he would campaign in an attempt to unify Japan, conquering Nagoroji, Shikoku, Toyama, Kyushu, and Odawara, which ended the Sengoku period. He'd also ban the peasantry from owning weapons to prevent revolts, creating a statue of Buddha from the melted remnants. He would then attempt to campaign against Korea with pretty poor results. One of his more famous acts was the perpetration of the 26 Martyrs, where 26 Christians were arrested and tortured, then crucified in Nagasaki. He'd try to war with Korea again and would achieve some victories, but it would ultimately fail. Hideyoshi passed away in 1598. This would mark the beginning of Tokugawa's prohibition of expansionist attempts until the 19th century. Number 2. Oda Nobunaga. The biggest and baddest of the boys. Oda Nobunaga was born into power, but once his father passed, the clan began to dissolve into a succession crisis. He would wrangle power from his relatives, consolidating the clan in not a moment too soon, as their longtime rival Imagawa was ready to invade. Leading an army of roughly 2,000 men against 25,000, Nobunaga aggressively battled his rivals, gaining allies and territory through frankly genius strategic calls that led the small territory to sudden and crushing victories. He would then lead a campaign to unify Japan, a massive series of wars that began the Sengoku period. His exploits are far too many for just this one point, and in 1882 he would be betrayed by Akechi Mitsuhide, who would then take the life of Nobunaga's son and force Nobunaga to commit seppuku. Number 1. Miyamoto Musashi. Swordsman, philosopher, writer, ronin. These and many more titles are attributed to the famed warrior Miyamoto Musashi, the wandering swordsman whose exploits are detailed in the self-published Book of the Five Rings. The legends and exploits of this man are legendary, from his first duel to his fight with Sasaki Kojiro, and once more, what is fact and what is fiction can be heavily debated. He was also famed for his peculiar style of combat, using one sword in each hand, a katana and a wakizashi, or sometimes a jute, a sword parrying tool. He claimed that his arms could move more naturally that way, but it also just could have been the rule of cool. Musashi's greatest achievement may have simply just been passing away peacefully in his 60s. His fame has long since lasted in media, most famous being the manga series Vagabond. Number 10. Nakano Takeko. A shrewd tactician and highly skilled warrior, Nakano was inspired from a young age by the stories of the famed Onimusha Tomoe Gozen. Initially working to teach royal women how to use the naginata, a pole weapon that resembles a cross between a sword and a spear, Nakano would be embroiled within the Boshin War. This civil war saw the Tokugawa shogunate clash with imperial forces. Now siding with the Tokugawa, she armed herself with a white weapon and gathered a group of women to fight alongside her. This group was dubbed the Joshitai, fighting independently from the main army due to discriminatory rules set by the officials. Famously, at a skirmish at Yanagi Bridge, the Joshitai faced down a squad of imperial troops who, when seeing that their enemies were women, were ordered not to shoot. This brilliant idea was followed up by Nakano easily dispatching between 5 and 6 soldiers single-handedly, the rest of the Joshitai dealing massive damage to the force. Number 9. Lady True. In 226, when Sun Quan sent soldiers to take control of the Jiaoji region, he couldn't have possibly predicted what he'd end up running into. Organizing a rebellion, Lady True gathered 1,000 followers with the goal of revolution. When her brother attempted to prevent her from doing this, Lady True said the coolest thing I've ever heard from a human being. "I'd like to ride storms, kill orcas in the open sea, drive out the aggressors, conquer the country, undo the ties of serfdom, and never bend my back to be the concubine of whatever man." What happened from there isn't terribly well recorded, but it was stated that she fought from the back of a white elephant and may have also been 9 feet tall. That might be fictitious, but regardless, her name has become synonymous as a symbol of rebellion in Vietnam. Number 8. Queen Tuta. Bluntly, it's hard to find good accounts of Tuta's time as a queen, as both of the historians of the time were a little rude. Nevertheless, Queen Tuta rose to power after the death of Angron, becoming the Queen of Illyria. Securing her territory from rebellion, her army also happened to capture a Greek city on their return. Alongside this, Illyria was known for practicing piracy, which strained Greek and Roman trade. Ambassadors were sent to Illyria to negotiate with Tuta, who claimed that stopping the piracy would counter many long-held Illyrian beliefs. Now, one ambassador lost his temper, insulting Tuta to the point where she had them killed. Rome had its reason, and Illyria went to war. Unfortunately, the war was lost due to her forces being spread thin and the betrayal of a local governor. Number 7. Cynene. Born the half-sister of Alexander the Great, Cynene was a warrior princess who commanded the Macedonian armies with a skill second to none. She was recorded defeating an Illyrian queen and army, as well as the remnants of her half-brother's forces led by Alcitas. What little there is that is known of her reign, it is known that she plotted to marry her daughter to Philip Arrhidaeus, surrendering herself to Alcetus in order to delay the oncoming troops while her daughter was wed. Alcetus executed her, but she was so respected by his troops, who had been her enemy, that they rioted against their commander, which fulfilled Cynene's final wishes. Her daughter, Eurydice, would become another famed warrior queen and be buried next to her mother. Number 6. Grace O'Malley. Born to the O'Malley clan in the 1500s, Grace O'Malley earned a fearsome reputation as the pirate queen. Head of the O'Malley clan, she began life as an extremely headstrong woman, one tale of her youth being that she was refused from one of her father's expeditions to Spain due to her long hair potentially getting caught in the ropes, to which she just responded by cutting off all her hair. She defeated clans Joyce and McMahon and became a menace to England, famed for meeting Queen Elizabeth I to negotiate the release of her captured sons. The tales of these negotiations are widespread and also really sick, like how she was caught in the palace with a dagger on her person, or how she was given a lace tissue to sneeze into, which she did, and then promptly tossed into a fireplace. In the end, she won her sons back and was given control of her land, employed as one of the world's first privateers under the crown. Number 5. Lozan. Lozan was a Chichihene Chiricahua Apache combatant who fought for the freedom of her people from the San Carlos Reserve in Arizona. Operating under the command of her brother Victorio, Lozan was famed for leading refugees across the Rio Grande and guiding a mother and child across the Chihuahuan Desert, supposedly even taking down a longhorn with just a knife to silently acquire supplies. Returning to the front, Lozan was eventually captured, passing away as a prisoner of war, but her tale lives on as a legendary warrior. Number 4. Boudica. A Upon the death of Iceni king Prasutagus, he issued a will that proclaimed both of his daughters and the Emperor Nero to be his heirs. His will was ignored by the Romans, and the kingdom was subsumed by the Britannian province, Roman soldiers sent to ensure its delivery into Nero's hands. What happened from there was an utterly vile razing of Iceni lands. Prasutagus' wife Boudica and his daughters were tortured and their people massacred. Boudica, incensed with the desperation of revenge, organized an uprising and led an army of Iceni warriors to regain their liberty. They responded to the brutalities committed against them in kind, ensuring that even if they did not win, then the Romans would at least understand the grave error they'd made in taking their land. Number 3. Fuha. One of the strongest generals in Chinese history, Fuha worked as both a priest and a warrior. She married into Wu Jing's household and worked her way up the ranks, making her way to the position of second queen. From there, she engaged in military activities and rituals, overseeing numerous campaigns in the name of the Shang dynasty. She is also credited with the earliest known usage of the ambush tactic in Chinese history. While exceptional from current knowledge of this period, it should be noted that the Shang dynasty frequently employed women as soldiers within their armies. Even so, her achievements were so great that on her passing, Fuha was buried with 130 weapons, along with several human sacrifices and a massive amount of jade and other assorted objects. Number 2. Zenobia. One of the greatest Syrian rulers, Septima Zenobia rose to power through marrying King Odenathus, who was assassinated by the jealous Maeonius, who lasted as emperor for all of about 5 minutes before being killed by his own soldiers. Though her son was set to rule, he was also, 10, so Zenobia was made the regent. Consolidating power, Zenobia began to expand her borders eastward, her regency slowly turning into just plain out old rule. Declaring her son to be the emperor, she became the de facto empress, and continued to rule. Beloved by her people, she made the kingdom a place of learning and religious tolerance, striving to make sure that the multiple peoples under her rule were treated fairly and well. While she initially attempted to avoid conflict with Rome, they did clash after the whole, she became an empress thing. The result did end up in Zenobia's loss, and she was captured by the Romans, who apparently spared her, and accounts from what happened then are sketchy at best. We may not know what exactly happened, but the empire she made was certainly one to remember. Number 1. Ana Nzinga. Queen of the Mbundu kingdoms in the land of Angola, Nzinga initially began her career in politics as an ambassador to the Portuguese, whom the Mbundu were constantly at war with. When her father passed, her brother Mbandi came to power, attempting to consolidate his strength and continue warring with the Portuguese. He used his sister as a diplomat to attempt for peace. However, the Portuguese demeaned and belittled her, furnishing their rooms with chairs for themselves and a floor mat for her. Undaunted, Nzinga had her attendant form her chair and spoke with the diplomats eye to eye, securing a peace treaty. This was short-lived, however, and Mbandi eventually had to abdicate the throne to her. From there, she led a war against the Portuguese and the Mbangolans, taking the Matamba lands and growing her forces through a mixture of carefully plotted and ingenious exploitations of cultural rules and rights. She warred with Portugal for 25 years, wearing down their forces until peace talks began, aided by the Portuguese stirring conflict with Spain. Nzinga would then begin to tentatively integrate Christianity into her kingdom, and strove to ensure that no wars of succession would occur after her passing.
Number 10. The Jaguar Warrior. Mesoamerica, a beautiful ancient place full of culture, wonder, and civilization. If you're a Spanish conquistador, then the most important thing there is riches, gold. There's lots of gold there. Tons and tons of riches. However, something some folks may not know about is a very powerful warrior the Aztecs had, the Jaguar Warrior. RAR XD. Don't ever do that again, sorry. that's just the worst. Yes, and just as vicious as it sounds, the Aztecs had no standing army, so most men were kind of just trained to be warriors just in case. The Jaguar Warrior was a fierce warrior who proved his salt by capturing 4 enemies. And only then he would be classified as such. Now, why is capturing enemies so important, you may ask? Well, it's so you have a plentitude of sacrifices to make when the gods ask you for some. Oh yes, They do this in full dress too, sometimes even wearing a jaguar skin on their head and their backs. It's kind of weird. Just keep your eyes out for those ones, folks. Keep your eyes out in the jungle, you never know. Number 9, Spartan. Did you really think I wasn't going to mention Spartans when talking about the most powerful warriors in history? Sparta, another beautiful ancient place full of culture and wonder. Sadly, these were times of great battles, and none were better than the Spartans at this. Complete with their Agog training, Spartans were bred for this kind of butter. Working as a unit with a group of Phalanx strategy made them extremely effective. Complete with their shield spear and short Xephos sword, the Spartans were a formidable fighting force, and the bravest of warriors. You only have to look at the examples like the Battle of Thermopylae to have this make sense, and the movie 300. I love those painted on abs, you gotta love them, right? Number 8, Samurai. Anime fans rejoice, because I have now mentioned samurai. All is well. Where would we be without the samurai and his katana? I don't know honestly, but they are warriors not to be trifled with, I do know that. The samurai were a unique class of warrior, and in the beginning, they were paid to protect the goods of those who could not afford such services. But eventually they became so wealthy that they became a noble class of their own, and their boss sort of became the leader of a fractured nation. The emperors are still there, but the shoguns, they're the ones in charge. Kinda like your mom and dad at home. Yeah, dad's there, he shows up, but mom runs the show. We know how it goes. They followed a code of honor and did whatever to uphold that. Cunning warriors and excellent swordsmanship, as well as archers and horse riders. They were so cool that it gave George Lucas an idea back in the 1970s to base the Jedi around them. If that's not cool, I don't know what is. The samurai ruled for hundreds of years, with their share of victories and defeats. Number 7, Ninja. The warrior that goes bump in the night. The reason why dudes with my proportion thinks warriors in black cloaks running on rooftops with frog-toed shoes are cool. I know, nice. The ninja, stealth and espionage expert, and maybe the first to do so. The ninja were a group of mercenaries in the 15th century Japan, or at least got their start in 15th century Japan, who rose to prominence as the guys you hire when you need some shady stuff done. The battles between samurai and ninja are noteworthy to say the least. However, the fact that more often than not, instead of fighting the samurai often hired the ninjas to do their dirty work. Corruption, theft, sabotage, and just some good old-fashioned spying. Good old stuff. This sneaking around was accompanied by some excellent fighting tactics and dastardly weaponry to go along with it. The black egg in particular gives me nightmares. It's kind of like when you got something stuck in your eye and you just can't get it out, except it's not an eyelash. It's a little egg that you throw at people's faces and it's filled with crushed glass. Ouch. I don't even know how you'd get that out in ancient times. There's no eye wash station, so you know what? Cut it. I ain't part of that one. Ain't doing it. Nope. Number 6, Flama. Here's something new I learned. That's how you know it's going to be a good video, folks. I actually learned something, I know. Flama was a Roman gladiator, perhaps of Syrian descent, or maybe Roman, we're not exactly sure. However, the story goes like this. The Roman Colosseum, big stands with big fans, maybe even some snacks too. It may be a blood sport, but you gotta have some grub. Personally, I'm a ballpark dog kind of guy. One shot of mustard, one shot of ketchup, please. Anyway, I digress. Flama was a very interesting gladiator. Unlike most others, he took part in a lot of battles, probably the most. And like a lot of others, he was taken to become a fighter at such a young age, so he could earn his freedom. So he fights for his freedom, that's kind of crazy. The thing with Flama is that he won 4 times. Won his freedom 4 times. And each time he refused and continued to fight. It's more of a, I'm not locked in here with you situation, you're locked in here with me situation. I'm good at Call of Duty sometimes, that's gotta count for something though, right? I'm not a gladiator, but I can play Call of Duty, that's good, right? Number 5, Alexander the Great. Everyone has ups and downs except for Alexander the Great. Besides a few skirmishes here and there, he was pretty much undefeated. That's a pretty good record. But he was like 10-0, and if this was Call of Duty Search and Destroy, that's good enough for me. The Macedonian prince's empire stretched thousands of miles from Greece to northern Africa, Persia, and even some parts of India. He accomplished all of this at a very, very young age. So, you know, get off your lazy butt and do something. That means me too. I just love being a homebody, what can I say? Although, I do enjoy the odd drinky poo with friends. Yeah. There's a famous quote, and I think this explains pretty much all of it. And Alexander wept, for he had no more worlds to conquer. Tragic. It's hard being a #1 top ancient warrior guy. It really is. It's really hard. Number 4, Mad Jack Churchill. This guy needs to be talked about more, man. He's so awesome. WW2. Germany was back for the sequel, and this time with its other tough guy friend Japan and their little paisano Italy. The boys were back in town and ready to party. Mad Jack Churchill got the invitation and brought some party favors with him. What did he bring, you're asking? Well, my fellow humble bumblebees, he brought a sword and a bow and bagpipes with him, which, if you didn't know, that's ancient stuff. But he brought it to a modern war. What? What's so weird about it? This is World War II. Swords and bows just aren't it anymore. They don't belong there. In fact, Mad Jack Churchill has the last recorded longbow D-Life in history. He has been noted to play Scotland the Brave when the enemy had him in their sights. He was captured multiple times and escaped multiple times. Walking like thousands of miles to get out of there. Kind of crazy. When the war ended, he was genuinely upset it was over. He thought it was more of a game. Hollywood, if you're listening, someone make this movie or TV show. I'll play him. I'll do it. I'll come play him Scotland the Brave. Number 3, Genghis Khan. Sometimes in life you make an impact in history. Sometimes you do so much it's hard not to talk about you. Genghis got to write his own history. The ruthless and powerful warrior from the Mongol Empire. Basically, it goes down like this. You got something he wants, albeit land to camp on, people for his empire, or just riches in general. Now, while he deletes your village and kingdom, you got 2 options. Option 1, if you don't agree with the terms and conditions of option 2, then the chaos of option 1 continues. Or option 2, assimilate into our empire or refer to the consequences of option 1. Ooh, I'll take option 2 thanks, I like to live. But keep your religious freedom, though, for some reason. He let people keep their religious freedom, which is kind of cool. Even for a bloodthirsty monster, he was kind of cool with that. So gold star, buddy, gold star. And of course, the classic fact that he did so much bedroom stuff that his DNA is still with us today, and has way too many descendants than we like to admit. That's just crazy, man. That's insanity. That's insanity. Number 2, Navy SEALs. Oh baby, some real slick frogmen. These are the guys that are sent behind enemy lines and gather vital intelligence. Some of the best. It doesn't get tougher than the Navy SEALs. Finding their roots in the Vietnam War, the Navy SEALs have been one of the toughest special forces the United States has ever seen. They've been involved in almost every major conflict the US has found themselves entangled with for the last 60 years. For me, when I think Navy SEALs, I think of the classic PS2 game. Remember that? Remember that game? I remember that game. It's pretty sick. Let's put that game back. Game was super ahead of its time. And number 1, Spits and Us. The spearhead of Russian special forces. These are tough guys with a tough history and ironically enough to mirror the history of the previously mentioned Navy SEALs. Getting their start as advisors to the VC in the Vietnam War, and of course being a part of every major conflict the Soviet Union was a part of, and even the ones you may not know about. There's also a common rumor that the Spetsnaz trainees are given a pet. Sometimes it's a chicken or it's a dog, not too sure there, the information's not great, which kind of hurts the validity of the rumor, but the point stands nonetheless. Their duty is to basically raise and love and nurture this pet until an officer instructs them to take the pet to greener pastures. Yeah, no thanks.
Number 10 will be creepy critters. War held in a jungle is going to provide much more than human enemies. The following information is provided by R.J. Holland, an 11th ACR tank crewman, who states lieutenant in charge would tell him to keep one eye open for Charlie and the other eye open for ferocious little bastards. The giant red ants' nests would hang from trees, and Tank TC would go headfirst into one before he ever even knew it. Holland states that thousands of ferocious ants would be biting and crawling all over you, and while there was bug spray, it would take about 10 minutes for it to work. You would endure until it did. If you took off your boots for the night, you'd have to turn them upside down and smack them in case a scorpion crawled inside, and their stings could be lethal if not immensely painful. There was also 15-inch centipedes that made a clacking noise as they slithered up your legs and have horrible infectious bites. Slimy, swollen black leeches would stick to brown water sailors as crocodiles stalked them. Similar to that, night patrollers were often snuck up upon by tigers. Then there was the most weirdest things, as stated by Holland, a long vine that would catch onto you, hold you, and not let you go. They're called wait a minute vines because when they get a hold of you, you'd yell out to the others, wait a minute, and get someone to cut it off of you. Then there are the snakes. Holland was never informed at basic training how to identify what was venomous, so seeing any snake meant risk. To quote him, the one we called the two-stepper was supposed to be bad. After being bitten by it, you took 2 steps and apparently dropped dead. We did learn that round-headed snakes are usually okay, but triangle-headed ones are venomous. But if we saw a round-headed snake, we sure as hell didn't pat its head. Reason number 9 is civilian casualty. The US started a war with Vietnam as part of the Cold War effort to prevent the spread of communism across the globe. They had seen North Vietnam's victory on the French and feared the spread into the South state of Vietnam, feeling it weak to resist. The war was fought on Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Laos land. Over 58,000 American troops were killed in Vietnam, with more still not identified. However, American civilians were not killed in the Vietnam War and faced next to no foreign threat. The same cannot be said for the residents of Vietnam. In 1995, their government released its official estimate of people killed during the Vietnam War, as many as 2 million civilians on both sides and some 1,100,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fighters. The US military has estimated between 200,000 and 250,000 South Vietnamese soldiers died. Approximately 5 million Vietnamese people were also left wounded or disabled. The United States had flown 3.4 million aircraft sorties, which for those who do not recognize the term, is a combat mission of an individual aircraft. Additionally, the US expended 30 billion pounds of munitions, releasing the equivalent force of 640 big booms. Reason number 8 is the cover-up. The My Lai killing was one of the most horrific incidents of violence committed during the Vietnam War, and an explanation as to how the Viet civilian death toll was so high. The small village of My Lai is located where American intelligence believed a stronghold of the Viet Cong was based during the Vietnam War. At the time, morale amongst the US soldiers, especially in the wake of North Vietnamese-led Tet Offensive, when the Charlie Company, the perpetrating soldiers, had lost some 28 of its members. When the company arrived shortly after dawn in My Lai, led by Lieutenant William Wallace, they found no Viet Cong, instead a quiet village of mostly women and seniors preparing breakfast rice. The villagers were rounded up into groups, and despite only finding a few weapons amongst the homes, Wallace ordered his men to begin offing the villagers. Women were violated, the elderly butchered, and approximately 500 died before Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson, an Army helicopter pilot on a separate recon mission, flew overhead and saw what was happening. He landed his aircraft between the soldiers and the retreating villagers and threatened to open fire on the American soldiers if they tried to continue. Thompson and his crew flew dozens of survivors to receive medical care. Knowing news of the deaths would cause a scandal, officials higher up in the command of Charlie Company and the 11th Brigade immediately made efforts to downplay the bloodshed. It was outed by the soldier Ron Ridenhour and investigative journalist Seymour Hersh in November of 1969. The revelations of the My Lai caused the American soldiers' morale to plummet even further, as GIs wondered what other atrocities their superiors were concealing. And tragically, they were right to do so. Later investigations have revealed that mass decimation at My Lai was not an isolated incident, having occurred in other villages such as Mai Khi. Then there's the notorious military operation called Speedy Express that killed thousands of Vietnamese civilians in the Mekong Delta, earning the commander of the operation the nickname the Butcher of Delta. Reason number 7 is being far from home. The Vietnam War is known as a wildly unpopular war in American history for a multitude of reasons. One is being a parent during it. Let's look at it from the perspective of living in the 60s and 70s. Vietnam is about 10,000 miles away from mainland US. During the 1960s, there were no cell phones, there was no internet, and a letter could take months to reach across the world. This naturally made our world much, much smaller. Barely any of the average Americans of the time, and even today, had been somewhere near Vietnam. From 1961 to 68, American troops fought in Vietnam, taking approximately 2.7 million men abroad. This was the bloodiest conflict the US has fought since World War II and still is to this date. To get the manpower required, 25% of men were acquired through draft alone, so approximately 648,000. That means as men turned 18, they were required to put their name in for the draft and, if called, to go fight in the military some 10,000 miles away, with no way to contact their families or for their families to contact them while the war stretched on for 10 years. Now think of being a parent, a significant other, a sibling, or a friend to the young men being sent to Vietnam. You can't hear from them, and you won't. You receive all your updates on newspaper headlines that already receive their news delayed from overseas and have to be unsure if the tragic loss of soldiers on the battlefield they describe included your special person. Some soldiers' bodies were never found nor identified, meaning some people never learned the fate of loved ones. Reason number 6 is the Saigon Iron Fist. So when it came time for America to leave Vietnam, it was in haste. This is proven in 1975 when the People's Army of Vietnam captured the city city of Saigon and destroyed the airport. In the final stages of the war ending, the Americans in Vietnam evacuated in a panic, abandoned any and all Vietnamese who had served alongside them in a state of immense despair, and they then tried everything in their power to evacuate with their supposed allies. In just one day, the US evacuated over 7,000 people using helicopters in Operation Frequent Wind, which followed the principle of American First's policy. In the vicinity of the US Embassy, which served as the evacuation point, thousands of Vietnamese nationals attempted to climb over the walls and rush towards helicopters in vain. This is when the famous photo of Saigon Iron Fist was taken, a symbol of America's failure in the war that was heavily circulated by media outlets. As seen in the photo, a Vietnamese man is desperately trying to board a loaded departing plane as his friend ushers him, yet an American leans out and delivers a powerful punch to force him off the plane. It struck hard at the proverbial faces of Vietnamese people who had once faithfully served alongside the US military, and also shattered the confidence and loyalty of many who blindly trusted and idolized the US. Reason number 5 is Miss Saigon. Part of what was so devastating about the Iron Fist is that many of those Vietnamese people attempting to board the flights were the wives of the American soldiers. Having lived so long in Vietnam, many young Americans had relations or even full-out marriages with Vietnamese women. When the Americans retreated in 1975, these families were forced to be left behind. According to an article in the New York Times in 1984, the estimated number of American offspring being raised by single mothers in Vietnam ranged between 25,000 and 40,000. During the US retreat, soldiers were given orders not to bring their local families back, even on threat of death, and it was reported soldiers had jointly written letters and petitions beforehand to the government requesting permission to bring their families back to the US and were still denied. Scenes captured by CBS News showed heartbreaking moments of American soldiers parting with Vietnamese families who were left to be marginalized. These families were seen by the Vietnamese people to be betrayals, signs of the enemy. The renowned musical Miss Saigon tells the tragic story of a Vietnamese woman who falls in love with an American soldier. However, the soldier does return to the US and gets remarried. Eventually, the woman takes her life. This tragic story is not an isolated incident, but represents the plight of an entire generation. In the 1980s, under strong public pressure in both Vietnam and America, the US finally enacted legislation allowing the families of American soldiers to immigrate to the US. Reason number 4 is black and orange. Apart from the families left behind by the Americans after the Vietnam War, there was also the legacies of the orange and black horrors. Orange is the name for a toxic property used by the US during the war, claiming endless casualties during it. 70 million liters were used over a period of 9 years, causing direct or indirect deaths of over 400,000 people and becoming a source of major environmental contamination in Vietnam, causing illness, disabilities, and cancers, which in turn caused mass financial duress. The ecological environment in the southern regions of Vietnam also suffered catastrophic damage, with 20% of the rainforest and 30% of the mangroves dying, and over 3,000 villages being directly contaminated. In 2014, Vietnamese nationals initiated a collective lawsuit that is demanding compensation from American companies for the producing of orange. Black, meanwhile, refers to the big boom weapons, as the US dropped tens of millions across more than 300,000 square kilometers of Vietnamese land. However, not all of them boomed on impact due to quality control issues. This has posed a serious threat for the decades since the Vietnam War, as they now sit undetonated, waiting for something to set them off. Statistics show that over the course of several decades, more than 20,000 people in Vietnam have been killed or injured by these long-buried weapons. Reason number 3 is tactics of war. The reason it was so difficult for either side of the war to gain advantage was due to the use of what can only be called fighting dirty. Vietnam was not a land war where you captured it and now it was yours. Inside, the large populations of Vietnamese people, many of whom were hoping the war would be passed by them, the Viet Cong blended in. They were highly skilled in hit and runs, ambushes, and other tactics that allowed them to blend in with the civilian population, pop out, do some damage, then blend in once more, making it difficult for American and South Vietnamese forces to identify and defeat the proper enemies. This wasn't just a physical warfare, but psychological, increasing soldier paranoia and feeding into their ability to rationalize such heinous acts as the My Lai killings. The more Americans violated and killed the neutral Vietnamese, the more the Vietnamese became sympathizers, or actually sided with the Viet Cong. The Vietnam War dragged on for years, with peace for the Americas just out of reach. The VC and the North Vietnamese regulars were going in to inflict as much punishment and death on the Americans to force their withdrawal from Vietnam, and they did. Reason number 2 is tunnel ratting. Fight fire with fire, more accurately dirty fighting with dirty fighting. The Viet Cong were crafty in their ways, especially being on home territory, which gives them the advantage. The Viet Cong developed a tunnel network that provided shelter, supply, and planning spaces within easy striking distance. This needed to be rivaled somehow, especially with the Viet Cong tunnels having over a 20-year advantage, so it meant American soldiers needed to get in the ground as well. And an unconventional group of small and scraggly Americans known as the Tunnel Rats was formed in 1966. Deliberate tunnel clearance fell to this group of volunteer infantrymen and engineers. The tiny tunnels, most only measuring 2 by 3 feet, meant soldiers could only enter one at a time. No two tunnel complexes were ever the same layout, stretching thousands of feet with sections joining at various angles. The job also required a special kind of mental toughness, as crawling for hours in claustrophobic darkness, expecting mortal danger that could break down even the bravest man. The job also demanded lightning-quick reflexes and no hesitation. Confrontations with venomous snakes or Viet Cong often occurred at hand-to-hand range. They had to travel light and abandon all their helmets, equipment, water canteens, even masks, entering with a hand arm, a flashlight, and a lot of guts. As Harold Roper, a tunnel rat from the early days of 1966, recalled, "I felt more fear that I've ever come close to feeling before or since." Reason number 1 is what Harold was afraid of: booby traps. The Viet Cong built booby traps in most of the tunnel systems, meaning that the brave tunnel rats could expect booms, poisons, punji stake traps, tethered venomous snakes, and more. These traps could also be found above ground, but with a few others added in. Punji sticks are traps made of sharpened bamboo sticks, often smeared with urine, feces, and other infection-causing gunk. Like in the Crash Bandicoot video games, the VC would dig a hole and then put the sticks in the bottom, cover it with a thin frame. The victim would put his foot through and fall onto the spikes below. Snake pits, yes, like in Indiana Jones. Viet Cong members would carry bamboo pit vipers, aka two-step snakes, in their packs to kill anyone who searched through them, or to tie them to bamboo and hide them throughout their tunnel complexes. The mace was a tripwire trap and may have been the worst of all. Once the wire was triggered, a 24-inch metal or wooden ball with spikes welded onto it weighing 40 pounds or more would swing down from a tree, and I'm sure you can imagine the carnage. Honorable mention goes to the tiger trap, which was similar to this one, but instead of a swinging ball, it was a man-sized plank full of metal spikes that fell from above, weighed with bricks.
Number 10, the Pig Wars. If there's one thing Americans love besides Dunkin' Donuts, I'm just assuming because your commercials tell me that America runs on Dunkin's. If it's not that, it's manifest destiny. It seems the second the founding fathers and patriots won their freedom, they wanted just a wee bit more and took over what is now the United States of America from coast to coast. Thing is, Britain was also still there in a land known as Canada, or actually British North America, or Rupert's Land if you went to Canadian history class. The British were doing the same thing and expanding westward. They both got to the Pacific West Coast and everything was cool, kosher, great. Well, except for some islands not too far from the mainland. It was heavily debated on who actually owned these islands. Well, it almost turned into another global war. Both Americans and British were living on the island. When a British-owned pig had gone one step too far and eaten out of an American field, the pig paid the price with his life, causing tensions to escalate to the point where the Navy and high-ranking officers got involved. Ooh, not good. Partially being stoked by an American who to this day, no one knows the method to his madness, but apparently he was looking for a fight regardless. Kind of a weird story. All over a pig. Jeez. Number 9, the Anglo-Zanzibar War. One day a disgruntled nephew got rid of his uncle and took the Zanzibar throne for his own. Classic story when it comes to royals, that's what they do. Naturally, the British who said dibs on Zanzibar were not all too pleased, as they had someone else in mind for the throne. Someone who would let them in and keep empiring as they do. So this angry nephew said, "Nah, I don't think so, fam. Ain't having that," and he started to organize the troops, and in a nutshell said, "You know what, why don't you come on in and try and stop me, you and one army." Well, it was the British Army. They did, and it's been recorded as the shortest conflict in human history, lasting only 45 minutes. The nephew escaped to the German embassy and the British moved in. The rest is colonial history. What a great story. Number 8, the Football War. It started with the leaders of Honduras and El Salvador. There was some agriculture and land disputes growing, and the leader of Honduras made it worse by using El Salvador migrants as scapegoats for their problems. Classic dictator move, am I right? Come on. Tensions kept getting hotter to the point where people were being treated differently, and that's not good. And because history is a funny thing, the 1970 World Cup at the time was going to be played by the both feuding nations. The passion, the rage, the anger, the music, they got good music down there, was poured into that game. Well, it was enough for El Salvador to cut all diplomatic ties and after the game, declare war outside of the soccer stadium, for real. people got hurt. It wasn't good. Man, that's rough. Number 7, the Emu War. Say what you will about country folk, but when small town folks band together as one, anything can be accomplished. Well, let's take a trip down under so I can talk about the Emu War. The Great Depression was tough. That was the case for Australian farmers. It was actually a little extra hard for them too. Unfortunately for the farmers, they also had an emu problem. Large birds eating and destroying their crops. I mean, they're massive. You see an emu? They're like this big. They're huge. The government in all her powerful glory decided to step in and lend a hand. They sent out soldiers with trucks and machine blam blams. So obviously the people got rid of the emus, right? It makes sense. There's armies here, we're gonna get rid of them, no problem. Well, no. What should have been an easy work unfolded into the Emu War. Weeks of trying to hunt down the pesky emus. It was somewhat ineffective. One politician joked that emus should be awarded medals for their bravery in standing up to the soldiers. That's just crazy. That's just, wow. Number 6, World War I. While there are many factors that led to World War I, and some that you might not hear in the classroom, but in a nutshell, new technology, militarism, imperialism, and a general distaste for each other were all thrown into a pot. She was turned on high, and when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, she was turned on high, really hot, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. A lot of people will tell you that's where it started, and they're not wrong. However, there was a lot of miscommunication and correspondence that had to happen between the empires first. In a series of very tragic events, leaders were on vacation, didn't get messages, people sat on war declarations, and before peace could be made, people were pointing fingers and playing the blame game, which is pretty much what got boots on the ground. And or to the grounds. Wasn't good. So in a nutshell, World War I was started by miscommunication. That's kind of awkward. Number 5, World War II. Well, surely after the most destructive conflict in human history, we wouldn't be so keen on another, right? Well, wrong. That could be the point right there, but the unusual event that started World War II was nothing. Just like that episode of Seinfeld. It was a war about nothing, George. I don't know. Well, not true, but let me explain. The factors leading up to World War II were all there. Fascism, communism, imperial expansion, again, revenge, unification. However, honestly, like a bunch of bad parents letting their kids get away with anything, nobody really did anything to stop Mustache Man. They used a policy called appeasement, which basically meant he wants something, he gets it. He wants something, he gets it. Not a great system. Okay, you can have that country, but no more. That's it. We appeased you enough. Oh, okay, you can have that one, but next time no more. That's it, for real. Oh, fine, you can have that one too, but now I'm putting my foot down. And after 4 or 5 countries fell to Mustache Man, that's when they finally did something. So really, it was neglect. Number 4, Jenkins' Ear. 1731, Britain. They were looking for an excuse to attack Spain. After all, they've got a lot of loot and gold, and come on, that belongs to Britain. It's gonna go in our museum, come on, that makes sense. They had just about run out of hope until Jenkins walked into the room. Sounds like a joke, but it's true. Jenkins was an English sailor who had gotten into a confrontation with Spanish authorities 8 years prior. Sadly for Jenkins, it cost him his ear. They took off his ear, because that's what you do back then. And as soon as the British caught wind of his ear, well, it was on. So yes, they did start a war over a man's missing ear, because it's a good reason to steal gold. Number 3, the War of the Bucket. Modena and Bologna, 2 warring Italian city-states. One sponsored by the big man in the big hat, which is the Pope as they call him I think, and the other was the Holy Roman Emperor. Big power struggle. Who's in charge? I don't know. This was kind of the way it went in ye olde medieval Europe. However, in 1325 it began to get a little spicy, as both Modena and Bologna would make a day out of raiding each other's cities, because even though we're pretty similar, we'll just attack each other, because yeah, sure. However, it got real serious when Bologna's bucket went missing. Oh! It started a war, and the real ironic thing is it might not have been stolen at all and just blamed in confusion of a missing bucket. Medina steals a bucket, we gotta get him. How dare you take my bucket? It's kind of like when your sibling takes your favorite toy. You did what to my action figure? You know what I mean? Number 2, the console war. My generation probably remembers the PS3 versus Xbox 360 war. I'm pretty sure Chris remembers that, he does. See? But the real one was Sega versus Nintendo in the 90s. Well, how did it start? Okay, well, Nintendo was on a huge roll. Super Mario, Metroid, Zelda, you couldn't stop them. That was until the Sega Genesis released with the edgiest blue hedgehog ever to grace your old TVs. Millions of dollars in smear campaigns, Genesis does what Nintendo doesn't. I'm sure you guys all remember that commercial. It was a really powerful commercial. I learned about it in business class, so there you go, look at that. And number 1, the Russo-Japanese War. This one's crazy. How about a war, cause it'll make us look cool, said the advisors to Tsar Nicholas II, worried the Russian Empire didn't look so cool anymore because it's been failing for a while. And in a classic schoolyard tactic, let's find the weakest link and start there. Well, they thought it was Japan, but as it turns out, Japan wasn't that guy, pal. He's not that guy, pal. And they won, very surprising literally everyone. So not only did a massive European power start a conflict with a puny island nation for bragging rights, but they also lost that war to a puny island nation for bragging rights. That's just crazy. Number 10, the war to end all wars. Alright, hear me out. Everyone knows about World War I, but that doesn't mean it wasn't weird. World War I was probably one of the weirdest wars to ever be fought, technologically speaking. To put this into perspective, the first successful flight of airplanes was by the Wright brothers. It had only been done 5 years prior. World War I is also noted for the first use of tanks, chemical weapons, just to name a few party favors. But perhaps the weirdest thing about World War I was the use of old war tactics against new war tech. It was quickly discovered that running directly into machine gun fire is bad for your health. Number 9, just say no. Honestly, just a classic move. Great Britain, being broke, needed a new revenue stream. In total Pablo Escobar style, the British forced their way into China where they fought a war, and China was forced to cede over Hong Kong and other ports, along with letting Britain come in there and just sell all this delicious opium. It's weird because this is a similar tactic to what you'd see with cartels and gangsters, not a country. If old Ronald Reagan knew what was really happening during the Opium Wars, he'd be rolling around in his grave. Just say no, kids. Number 8, the Pig Wars. This is so weird it could only be real. So here's the rundown. After America had beaten Britain in the Revolutionary War, it was time for Manifest Destiny, expanding westward. The British were doing the same thing. They got to the Pacific West Coast and everything was cool, except for some islands not too far from the mainland. It was heavily debated on who owned these islands. Surely this can be resolved without conflict. Yes, it can be, and don't call me Shirley. Well, it almost turned into another global war, actually. Both Americans and British were living on the island, and when a British-owned pig had gone one step too far and eaten out of an American field, that pig paid the price with his life, causing tensions to escalate to the point where the Navy and high-ranking officers got involved. Partially being stoked by an American who, to this day, no one knows the method to his madness, but was honestly just looking for a fight regardless. What a crazy guy. Shot a pig, we're gonna start a war. Number 7, the Anglo-Zanzibar War. Never heard of this one, I bet. And as a comedian, I can appreciate the comedic value of this war. Not that wars are funny, but trust me, you'll see. The Anglo-Zanzibar War was a military conflict fought between the United Kingdom and the Zanzibar Sultanate on the 27th of August, 1896. Good year. What's very unusual about this war is its length. No, not because it's still happening today in a technicality like the Korean War, but rather how quick it ended. The conflict lasted about 40-45 minutes. The British Navy began a cannonade at 9 AM and had destroyed a large amount of the Zanzibar force by 9:45, leaving only one British sailor injured. The leader of Zanzibar made his escape, and the British officially moved in. Brutally moved in as well, actually. It was an occupation, it wasn't good. Number 6. For the Emperor. This one is my personal favorite on the list, as it's a story too crazy to believe, but it is very true. Strap in for this one, folks. What do you call it when the war you were fighting ended 25 years ago, but the enemy still thinks it's on? Yep, that's right. If you don't know, this actually happened, and while not a new war per se, it is technically their own little war. What I'm referring to is the Japanese holdouts of the Second World War. In the Pacific theater of war, Americans adopted a strategy called island hopping, which basically saw Marines clear out dug-in Japanese forces all throughout the many islands of the Pacific. When one was cleared out, they would move on to the next, and so forth and so forth. Except the thick jungles of these islands are good at hiding things, more specifically hiding Japanese soldiers who continued to fight World War II even though it was over years prior. Every few years or so, more soldiers would come out of hiding and surrender, but the most extreme case being Hiro Onoda, who was fighting the war for almost 30 years. From 1944 to 1974. During his time hiding, he raided and unalived local Filipino farmers. Next time you go to the jungle, just be careful. You don't know who's out there. Always watching, Mike Wazowski. I'm always watching. Number 5, Mad Jack Churchill. Again, not exactly its own war, but Buddy here was fighting his own war, basically. Meet Mad Jack Churchill, a British commando who went into battle with a sword and bagpipes. I'm gonna say that again for the people in the back. Went into a modern war with modern weapons using a sword and bagpipes. When asked about his medieval ways, Jack replied with, "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." To add to this already insanity that is Mad Jack Churchill, he holds the record, or title, for the last recorded longbow kill in history. That's insane. When in 1940 a poor German soldier met the business end of Jack's barbed arrows, his military career was very impressive, having become a commando and escaping capture from Germans later in the war. He would then marry his wife and stay with her happily ever after for 55 years. Why is there not a movie of that guy yet? There should be a movie of that guy. Number 4, the Football War. Everyone loves football, and next time the World Cup's coming home. Okay, bad impressions aside, this war is over football. Well, sort of. It does have a little to do with land and agricultural disputes between Honduras and El Salvador. The dictator of Honduras at the time began to use El Salvadorians as a scapegoat, which made tensions sour between the two Central American countries. As it turns out, it was time for the 1970 World Cup and they were facing each other. But after some classic sabotage by both teams, tensions got even worse, as Honduras began to crack down on immigrant farmers from El Salvador. They'd had enough. Cut all diplomatic ties and declared war. Sometimes referred to as the 102nd War since it was so short, but sadly thousands of people died and it didn't really solve anything. But we still got football though, right? Come on, everyone loves football. Number 3, the Falklands War. If you look at the globe and take a look at the very southern tip of South America, then slightly east of that, you won't see very much. And that's because there isn't very much there. However, what is there is a very small island called the Falklands. It was colonized by Britain, France, and Spain in the 1700s, but because it was so far away, it wasn't really a top priority for any of the imperial powers. Everyone kind of had more important stuff going on. Well, fast forward a few hundred years and now Argentina wanted a piece of the action. Thinking taking the islands was going to be a cakewalk, Argentine forces took over. Britain, feeling like Argentina didn't respect the holy playground rule of dibs since they left a plaque on the island stating that it was theirs, went to war. A war which sadly did cost a few hundred lives. Today it's remembered for its losses and the leadership of Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher. Number 2. The enemy of mine enemy is mine friend. This is just too weird not to mention. May of 1945 was just a bad time to be a German evil mustache man. Actually, he was kaput, but the war still raged on. The weirdest battle of the month would have to be the Battle of Castle Itter. High-value French prisoners were being held in a castle that had been transformed into a prison. A small American force approached the castle when the Germans were spotted. The Germans immediately surrendered, and then offered to aid the Americans in liberating the French prisoners. Yep, that's right. Trouble is, there was a German SS force that wasn't going to let that happen. So, it was Americans and Germans versus some naughtier Germans. And after an intense firefight, the joint force would be victorious and the prisoners freed. Number 1, second-rate ostrich.
Any remaining Jedi will be hunted down and defeated. Any collaborators will suffer the same fate.
That was terrible. Anyway, sorry, that's my Palpatine side coming through. Sorry about that, guys. This is gonna be the weirdest thing you're gonna hear all week. Okay, I'm willing to bet most of you folks at home have never heard of the Emu War, which may be because the Aussies don't want you to know about it, as it is a little embarrassing, but basically this is how it went down. The Great Depression sucked for everyone. Australia was hit rather hard as they relied on agriculture exports. People just weren't buying. To make matters worse, there was an abundance of pests destroying crops. The worst of these crop eaters are knockoff ostriches, emus. So many emus were running amok that the farmers asked the military for help. The military, not wanting to mess around, obliged by sending a couple of men with 2 Lewis machine guns. When the pack of bloodthirsty emus was shot at, they ran away, and only a small number were killed. This happened multiple times, so much so that it was jokingly said that the emus should receive medals for their valor. Of an estimated 20,000 emus wreaking havoc, only about 1,000 were terminated. The army also spent a lot of machine gun rounds for this operation, so in a nutshell, the emus kinda won. Yikes.
Back in March of this year, Washington joined more than a dozen other states in seeking to crack down on toxic substances in cosmetics. This came about after a state-funded study found that there was arsenic in makeup products made by CoverGirl. It's incredibly alarming that some companies continue to use arsenic in their products, presumably to lower costs, since we've known about the dangers of the substance since the Victorian era. Most notably when people in Bavaria allegedly took to soaking in arsenic baths to keep their skin pristinely white. While arsenic is not as deadly when used to bathe in as it is when ingested, which can be fatal with less than 1/8 of a teaspoon, bathing in water containing the toxic element can cause severe irritation, skin redness, pigmentation changes, and skin lesions. But perhaps even worse, the fumes from the element pose an even bigger threat. According to the EPA, chronic inhalation of arsenic fumes poses a wide range of health risks from pharyngitis to lung cancer. While no one's bathing in it anymore, I hope, arsenic is still seen plenty in the marketplace, and CoverGirl is only one example. At number 9 is teeth whitening. Wanting pearly white teeth is not a new concept by any means. In fact, the practice of teeth whitening began around 4,000 years ago with the ancient Egyptians, who created a whitening paste using ground pumice stone mixed with wine vinegar. Since white teeth were always a mark of beauty and a sign of wealth, people throughout history have done a lot to get them, even with the side effects. For example, ancient Romans whitened their teeth using urine since the ammonia acted as a bleaching agent, and in the 17th century people relied on their barbers for the care of their hair and teeth. And I almost never like a haircut, so that tells me what the quality of dental treatment people were getting. Barbers would file down the teeth and apply hydrogen peroxide to whiten them, and while the practice did make teeth whiter, it eroded tooth enamel and led to decay. Teeth whitening is still not foolproof today, however better than whatever barbers were doing, I hope. These days, teeth whitening kits are pulled from shelves pretty frequently due to intensely high levels of hydrogen peroxide, which cause gum burns and tooth loss. In 2021, an investigation was launched on Oral Orthodontic Materials Store, a company on AliExpress, was found to have products containing illegal levels of the substance at 30.7%, the usual amount used for teeth whitening being only 5%. These were quickly pulled from shelves, but anyone buying teeth whitening products from AliExpress should be well aware of what they're getting themselves into. At number 8 is waist training with corsets. Corsets are one of the most notorious beauty accessories for causing obvious pain. They have been around for centuries to create the desired dramatic hourglass figure that for some reason became the ideal, despite it not being a natural asset for any human on Earth. An anthropologist, Rebecca Gibson, conducted a study of 10 female skeletal remains from the Victorian and Georgian eras, and she found the rib cages and spines of the corset-wearing women were deformed, thus pushing the diaphragm and major organs up and out of their original positions. Women weren't the only ones wearing corsets during the 19th century. Men, like England's King George IV, often strapped himself into the garment and as well did not go without suffering the consequences that came with it. In 1821, the severe constriction of his body from the corset caused George to nearly faint, which isn't a symptom that's gone away in the modern age. It's surprising that the corset trend hasn't gone away entirely considering the risks and possible danger, and instead has had quite the renaissance with current Gen Z fashion and television period pieces. But with the information we have that's widely available about how corsets may cause a wide range of complications like pneumonia, constipation, raised blood pressure, acid reflux, and fainting, rumors have begun to circulate that Netflix and BBC are phasing out the use of corsets from movies and TV shows. Although they've been a long-time fixture in TV show wardrobe and shows such as Bridgerton, Downton Abbey, and Jane Eyre, the Sun newspaper reports that TV producers are becoming increasingly concerned about the health effects on actresses wearing them for up to 14 hours a day on set, which oftentimes cause bruising, breathing troubles, and pain. It's said that Bridgerton producers have told the cast of the Netflix show that they don't have to use them, and many other production companies are set to follow suit, especially after the SAG-AFTRA strike put restrictive costuming compensation as one of their clauses. At number 7 is decorative contact lenses. While they absolutely didn't have contact lenses in the Victorian era, they used what they had at their disposal to make their eyes appear brighter. Many Victorian ladies took to squirting lemon juice in their eyes, which makes me shiver just thinking about it. If you got lemon juice in your eyes these days, you probably wouldn't consider that a cosmetic revelation, but instead an absolute disaster. I'm not sure if it would even make your eyes look any better, because it usually just causes redness and irritation to put citrus anywhere near your eyes. Queen Victoria herself also turned to putting undesirable stuff in her eyes, but even worse than lemon juice, she opted for belladonna, you know, the well-known poison. It was said to have dilated her pupils so she could see, and it wasn't like cataract surgery existed yet, so use what you got. This made dilated pupils a desired look though, so belladonna became extremely popular for getting that job done. Although belladonna is usually fatal if ingested, it is fortunately rarely deadly when used as an eye drop. However, long-term use of the poison can result in a lethal overdose. Immediate side effects include irritation, blurred vision, and light sensitivity, and sometimes sometimes dizziness, fainting, and irregular heartbeats. Making your eyes appear different is still huge in the market today, but with our new technology and eye contacts, you can put almost anything in that ocular cavity, even if you shouldn't. In 2002, the US Food and Drug Administration issued a health warning about the dangers of non-prescription decorative eye contact lenses because of the dozens of reports that said such contacts cause corneal ulcers, blindness, conjunctivitis, and ocular infections. Even if it is super cool to have a different eye color, it may not be worth the trouble. At number 6 is face powders with dangerous chemicals. Similar to our 10th point on this list, there have been a multitude of banned products over the past years containing toxic chemicals. Except this isn't to lighten skin but instead cover blemishes. In the Victorian era, many women turned to face powders containing quite mild ingredients like rice powder, zinc oxide, and the extremely expensive blend of chloride of bismuth and talc, but others made use of lead, which nowadays we understand to not only be extremely toxic, but absorbed through the skin at alarming rates. Side effects of lead poisoning include headache, constipation, memory loss, pain, and numbness, and if ingested in large quantities, will cause paralysis and death. Finding toxic chemicals in makeup products is hardly a thing of the past, as mentioned multiple times with this list. In 2019, Makeup at Claire's, a children's fashion accessory retail chain found in most malls, issued a voluntary recall twice in a 3-month period over concerns of asbestos contamination in its makeup products. A batch of the Jojo Siwa makeup set tested positive for asbestos during the FDA's ongoing investigation of asbestos contamination in cosmetics. Exposure to asbestos dust can cause serious health conditions decades later, including lung cancer and mesothelioma. Coming in at our halfway point is acne supplements. Arsenic wasn't used just to lighten skin, but also as a way to clear skin back in the day. Man, what a fix-all product. Not. It has literally always been a poison. Women consumed arsenic through the form of wafers and believed eating these deadly supplements not only cleared their complexions, but also changed the shape of their faces by softening sharp features and disfigurements. In 1902, the Sears catalog coined Dr. Rose's French arsenic complexion wafers, saying it possessed, quote, the wizard's touch in producing, preserving, and enhancing beauty of the face, while it developed a transparency and clearness of complexion, shapely contour of form, brilliant eyes, soft and smooth skin. What an understandable and well-written tagline. The advertisement adamantly claimed that the amount of arsenic in these wafers was crafted by expert chemists and thus was completely safe to eat, which is obviously untrue, but hey, we also thought cigarettes were healthy. The doughy complexion wasn't a result of their improved skin, but the red blood cells that the arsenic was destroying just below the skin's surface. According to Andrew Meharg, an arsenic expert and professor of biogeochemistry at the University of Aberdeen, found that regular exposure to even minute amounts of inorganic arsenic increases a person's risk of heart disease and cancer. On top of the long list of horrific side effects, which includes renal failure, epilepsy, and numbness, and at higher doses, arsenic even caused the skin deformities that these wafers claimed to remedy. At number 4 is mercury eyeshadow. Now, putting some shiny powder on your eyelids is hardly a behavior of the 20th century. In fact, traces of eyeshadow were first detected on Egyptian makeup brushes, oftentimes made from lead, ash, and oxidized copper. Our inclination to use dangerous substances on our faces only got worse as time went on, as in the Victorian era, a substance called cinnabar was used to create a vermilion red color that was oh so desirable. Although adding some rouge to your face may make you appear livelier, cinnabar contains mercuric sulfide, which is known to cause kidney damage. Mercury has been found in cosmetics today, even after being banned from use in cosmetics in 1972 by the FDA. A new report from the Zero Mercury Working Group finds that almost half of skin lightening creams tested contain dangerously high levels of mercury, but continue to be sold by online retailers like Amazon, even after multiple studies have linked mercury to a multitude of serious health problems, such as damage to your central nervous system, lung damage, and can often be fatal. Our number 3 spot goes to radioactive toothpaste. During the 1920s, Doormat radioactive toothpaste hit the shelves. They literally said it's radioactive on the tube, can't do much more warning than that. The toothpaste was slightly radioactive because it contained small amounts of ionizing radiation, which claimed to have health benefits like antibacterial properties and strengthening the defenses of teeth and gums by, quote, charging cells with a new vigorous life energy. These claims were bogus and in fact caused damaging effects to anyone who used the paste for a prolonged period of time. In the 20s, the harmful effects of radiation were not fully understood and instead were often promoted as a cure for all types of illnesses, which led to many radiation-based medicines and therapies such as radon-infused drinking water, which caused a man's jaw to fall off. Radioactivity is now well understood and many of these ill-advised products have disappeared, but not entirely. According to a report by the BBC published in 2021, Dutch authorities have found a number of, quote, anti-5G protection necklaces that give off harmful ionizing radiation. These necklaces are ironically popular amongst anti-5G activists who wear them to fight the harmful radiation of 5G mobile services. Our runner-up is whitening lotions. As said many times on this list, Victorian beauty ideals were unsurprisingly obsessed with incredibly pale skin. Upper-class white women desired a ghostly appearance to signify that their privilege never left them working in the sun. In order to do so, many Victorian women turned to corrosive face lotions, which many times contained lead acetate, known for side effects like paralysis, muscle atrophy, headaches, and nausea, though were advertised as harmless until 1869, when the American Medical Association published a warning. Mercury and lead is still found in skin lightening products today, even though they're both known as a carcinogen that can cause severe skin issues with prolonged use. Health Canada says the sale of such products is illegal but are still available for purchase, with sale clerks just issuing a warning of discretion. Not only are whitening creams awful for you physically, but also feed into the racism so blatant in today's society. These lotions are seriously doing nothing but cause harm. Our number one spot goes to hair removal. Back in the day, women sought smooth skin through the use of potassium nitrate. Nowadays, the chemical is used in rocket fuel, fireworks, and fertilizer, but a 1776 hair removal recipe called for potassium nitrate as one of the main ingredients. While it might remove hair, it'll probably also remove a layer of skin and cause lung damage with the poisonous gases it emits. Today, hair removal cream still has the potential to do more harm than good, with the most popular on the market Nair, oftentimes causing chemical burns, blisters, and rashes.